Welcome! We
Oh,
both said
voice.
hello at the same time. Hi!
My hair just falling apart over on the side. I'm sure no one can tell that I was up way too late. I'm desperately trying to finish a big video before I leave. I don't know if I'm gonna have enough time, but I'm trying so hard to get it finished before I leave. But we'll see what happens.
And obviously we've been discussing what's going to happen when he comes over, and that includes confirmation of what character he's going to be playing. We just had it just before the stream, and it's going to be a fun one. I've even done a picture. I've sent over the first quick stab at it, but I'm hoping to do another couple for some fun adverty goodness for you all to see when Sotek arrives here and plays some Warhammer. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a really, really good time. We'll have a lot of advertisements and stuff I'll be showing out before I leave. So like today and tomorrow morning, there will be a lot of stuff posted everywhere just so that that's all in place.
Done.
I'll even set some scheduled ones so that they go off while I'm not here. So we will handle all that in the next 24-ish hours, because in less than 48 hours I will be somewhere in the UK. So there's stuff is happening.
It's proper happening. Looking forward to it. And sometime within the next week, he's going to be literally here in this actual place. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, so want to thank everyone, by the way, for all like the little ideas and stuff about like what to do for the episodes and things. We'll talk more about that at the end of the stream, as we've been circling in on things. I think we're still kind of figuring out what we want to do for like the following Wednesday, but we figured out Sunday. Sunday's locked in, so that's good.
Sunday's definitely locked in. We know what we want to do Sunday, but we're not sure what we're going to do on the Wednesday. So, yeah, we'll probably decide that after this stream. So, you've got any really cool, funky ideas, do drop them into the comments as we go, and we will decide it after the stream today.
Yeah, but I will be fulfilling one of my career goals, which is to show up in a professional RPG online campaign, and I'm finally doing it. It's another line off the bucket list. I'm very excited.
Certainly is. I think I'm equally excited, just because the character that he's going to be playing is, I think, going to be a pretty big surprise, not just for the people watching, but also for the rest of the players, because he's going to have, well, I think appropriately for a Loremaster of Sotek, he's going to have some knowledge, and that's going to be fun.
Did you guys know that everything we do is determined by dice rolled by uncaring gods?
What?
In any event, hopefully you're all doing really, really well. As I'm sure you've seen by all the stuff, today we are doing Artifacts of the Old Ones, which is a much broader topic than it may seem like at first. You may think, oh, it's just Lizardmen. No.
No. This topic is a surprisingly old one that starts, I think, appropriate for an old one artifact a long time ago. So when we dive into our intro, we will cover that. But as always, we'll do a few super chats first, and we'll get everybody settled in before we start telling our tales.
Yeah. As far as other stuff goes, this, in case it isn't obvious, this is the last stream I'll be doing until I'm gone, because I am not going to be stupid and try to stream tonight. I got so much shit I gotta do. So this is it for me. I'm finishing off the Lorebeards. I'm getting the hell out of here. But I think that's pretty much everything. We can go ahead and hop into our early messages and super chats and stuff, and then we'll take it off from there.
Certainly.
Other than that, yeah, should be good. So let's see what we got here. BioFud, how you doing?
Hey, BioFud.
What is the most absurd or silly old one artifact? Okay, so this will be a matter of opinion. When Andy's doing his intro, he'll talk about some kind of stupid ones that Games Workshop threw in, mostly for giggles. Back a good. How long was the Albion campaign ago now? 20 years?
We're talking 20. Oh, it's almost like 23 years now. 23, 24 years, something like that.
A full functioning adult. But so there were a number of goofy ones in there, but probably the one that got the most infamy like really fast had to be I would guess that. So even though I actually don't think this artifact was that ridiculous from a lore standpoint, but it was silly with how it got used, which was the what you could call like the old one speed dial device from the end times, where the Skaven were screwing around in the vaults of Slonhapek, and they found a device that basically prank called the Eldar from 40k, and the Skaven freaked out and destroyed it. Which was very, it's a blink and you'll miss it really stupid moment, but it was genuinely very funny when I read it the first time.
I'm sad to admit that's the one I was going to say.
Yeah.
It's bluntly the most absurd, silly, but also kind of goofy, fun one.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one ranks. I don't think there's any that really compete with it, to be honest. Sean Schultz, is Sotek flying by old one's tech? God, I wish. I bet it would go so much faster. It probably wouldn't have an economy class.
Yeah. Passing the old ones, here we come.
Yeah, sadly, I am putzing my way across the sky like us normal humans do, and it takes a good 9 hours from, I think, 9 to 10 hours from DFW to where I'm off to. So, yeah, sadly, not the case. Serpanza, if Sotek's LAWhammer character doesn't have a rootin' tootin' Texas accent, I will be sadly disappointed. He certainly will have a very unique accent compared to everyone else in the show.
I mean, look, we discussed this right at the very beginning. We have, it's diverse as far as the UK is concerned, but we have a diverse set of UK accents. And we also have Sage, who has a lovely international mixture accent with hints of Italy, Japan, international schools, UK, and more. And inevitably, whenever they play a character, because sometimes they play characters that aren't their core characters, that are different, they're always going to have something that's relatively related to their accent. For example, Dan is always going to sound Irish. No matter where he goes, he tends to sound Irish. And somewhat similarly, when Sotek joins us, I've got a feeling, just maybe, he's going to sound kind of like Sotek.
Yeah, he's not going to rock up being like, howdy y'all, like doing the hat tip and stuff. He's not going to go all in. So, yeah.
Yeah, but not everyone's an idiot like me and tries stupid accents very badly. But I can't help myself. I've got a few
I don't think your accents are bad at all.
But then you don't speak those accents.
That's true. That's fair. That's true. From an American perspective, it's like, oh, wow, he's so talented.
oh, wow.
Darius Rose, from a 20-foot ladder, a glorious flying elbow from the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels.
He's back.
He's back to that. Slash Kane, an area at WrestleMania. There's actually a really funny set of overlaps between WrestleMania fans and Warhammer fans. That one day it'd be fun to see someone explore that who has like a good knowledge of both to really make something fun with it, but hasn't happened yet, which is genuinely surprising to me. Cameo, happy May 4th to those that celebrate. Oh yeah, May the 4th be with you for those that care. Wanted to ask, what do we know about the old ones as a species? Are they reptilian, for instance? Hope you enjoyed the UK visit, by the way. So we did an entire
stream
Lorebeards just on this, which is just Lorebeards like the old ones, where we talked about what they could be, and it's a whole lot of ideas and theories. Though the old ones ultimately are always best left as mysterious as you can afford to leave them. Because ultimately, if you dial in too much on them, then they become kind of more of a standard race when they're always supposed to be something above that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is, as it currently stands, no clear answer to this, but we give it a damn good go over in the old one stream. So I suggest that one, Cameo.
Yep. Meta Ganon. Choose what Lizardmen campaign I play while I watch. Go play tic-tac-toe. I curse you with suffering. Have a good time. Darius Rose. Also, how can I get into watching LAWhammer? I want to, but it feels like One Piece. So many episodes.
You're not wrong. There are so many episodes. For all we've got, what, 61 numbered one? Number 61 goes up on Monday. If we also talk about all the Tales episodes, which are the little side stories that happen alongside the main one, we've got about.
I don't want to watch those. I don't think they're genuinely side content.
That's fair. But that means we have about 110 episodes, averaging about 3 hours per episode, which means, yeah, there's about 300 to 400 hours of content there. It is a lot, and you're not wrong. So we've been discussing it at this side because there's quite a few people who want to watch what we're doing now, but don't want to watch 300 to 400 hours worth of content just to watch some people having a bit of a laugh. So that being the case, we're doing some summaries just now. We've already summarized the first season. We're about to summarize the second season, and what we're doing, we're going to release those as videos. So if you want to just quickly have a summary as to the core beats of what happens, you can do so and then dive in. Having said that, though, yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff out there, and if you just read the summaries or watch the summaries, because we're going to do it as live recordings, if you just watch the summaries, you're going to miss out on a ton of crazy shit. But that's cool, because you can always go back and watch those later if you wish to do so.
Yeah, and also, I mean, for all that it may not seem like it, you could genuinely just show up on a Friday and watch an episode, and there's enough people hanging around in the chat that if you do have questions, they will be more than happy to answer your questions. But it's not that hard to get caught up with what's going on pretty quick.
True fact. And it's also fair to say that the episodes that we're going to be doing this Friday, so that's the episode that Sotek is going to be involved with, sitting over on this side. The screen keeps on flipping for me in StreamYard, so I get confused as to which side I need to point towards.
It keeps you on your toes.
I think it's that side, stinking StreamYard. But I'm presuming I'm pointing towards him. But the episode that we're doing is going to be almost standalone. Yes, it's going to be part of an ongoing story, but I'm going to be specifically designing it around and also introducing it as an episode that if you want to just turn up and watch Sotek having a laugh with us, you absolutely can do so. And yeah, he's going to be dropping a couple of interesting lore snippets as he goes too.
Yeah, I can't wait to see me playing there with my cheat index cards being like, did you know?
Yeah.
Sean Schultz, is Sotek playing the skink on LAWhammer? No, and I'm going to be honest, I'm kind of thankful for that because I have a skink voice that I enjoy. It's hard to do for long periods of time. It is genuinely hard to do for long periods. I
honestly considered doing this because it is the obvious choice, but I think if we were doing it, we'd be better doing it in a period and a point when it makes sense. Because, I mean, I'm not saying this is the only time Sotek's likely to pop over at some point, and if he ever does again in the future, it's very possible we'll be doing something which is much more skink aligned. For example, campaign number 2, which is looking more and more likely is going to happen, is called Paths of the Old Ones, which, you know, that sounds like
that would
you know, fit in a little bit better than you might expect. So if we're doing Paths of the Old Ones, which is looking kind of likely, then yeah, that might be a nice thing to do for then. But I think for the first one, we start a little bit more sensibly and a little bit more easily on his poor voice.
Yeah, not spending the first hour just getting through the what the hell is that thing? Why does it talk? Yeah. Hammond, will Escape be called Ted Crooks? Only if I could die horribly in the first like 5 minutes.
We could have him slain in the most horrendous fashion and then just leave him sitting at the edge of the table going,
it'd be worth it. It'd be worth it. Frank Grayman, it's my birthday tomorrow. Well, happy birthday. What is a good lore reason you could make for the Seraphon Soulblight fight in Shyish and AOS? Well, that's not hard at all to do. Lizardmen versus vampires, essentially. The easiest one always is that the Seraphon, just like so the Seraphon and AOS are basically one of the big upgrades from Fantasy to Age of Sigmar. Was some writer sat down and said, "What if we did the Lizardmen, but they actually had agency?" And so a big aspect of that is forcing the Great Plan to go, well, those of them that still follow the Great Plan are at least doing up to shenanigans, forcing the things they think needs to happen into alignment as opposed to just kind of waiting for them to happen. So what you could easily have is that the Lizardmen or the Seraphon believe that a certain site needs to be like completely cleansed of any and all things, and they need to put a Realm Shaper engine there and restore it to some manner of stability because they believe it'll have some great effect in, thousands of years in the future. And the vampires are currently camping out there and they're maybe, siphoning power from some kind of geomantic power nexus to further their own necromantic rituals, and the Seraphon are like, nope, that shit needs to stop, and that'll cause a fight. But death versus order, they fight over a lot of shit. A lot of shit.
Perfecto.
Darius, who's more grudgy, the average dwarf or Bret Hart? Bro, I don't know any of these fucking people.
So it's going to be the average dwarf. It's not going to be Bret the Hitman Hart. It actually turns out he got over a great deal of his grudges. So there you go. The average dwarf is probably going to be a bit more grudgy.
If not a skink, call him Thaddeus Cruzeiro. I didn't realize he turned into an Astalian or a Talayan there. Sotek is Dodgy Johan confirmed. Honestly, I'm quite curious. Now that you mentioned it, I'm quite curious what Dodgy Johan is up to. We haven't seen him on LAWhammer for a hot minute, but the last time he showed up, he did some insane info drops on poor Boris.
Actually, not quite true, because there's a side episode that's gone up where he features for the briefest of moments at the very end of it. It's 59.1, I think.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that is right.
He's right at the very end, and he's right at the end, and just very briefly goes, "Oh, huh." And then off they went.
Yeah, that's the one where he gets threatened by a certain villain, isn't it? Yeah. When the well, not threatened, but like him and a villain have a conversation.
I don't think so. I think you might have got that mixed up with another one. It's the stream with Yume and Alamenawythe, doing all their stuff. It's currently patron
the recent
only.
one.
Yeah, the recent one.
I haven't watched that one yet. That's why.
You haven't watched that yet. That one has got for you lore fiends, because it'll be going up relatively soon. That one has got one hell of a speech about the elven gods in it.
Oh, I didn't realize we were doing that recent. I thought you were talking about the one where the PCs were going into the party.
Super recent. So yeah, he has been mentioned relatively recently in our show.
Okay, well there you go. Kornshima, can some old one artifacts be stronger than the Sword of Cain? Well, okay, so stronger is kind of a difficult word. It depends on what you mean by stronger, which I know is the most annoying phrase to hear, but it's true. Like a good example, and one that we'll kind of talk about, even though there's not a lot to discuss with it, but like the way the Warhammer world literally ends is a old world artifact. An old world artifact is used to destroy the planet. So you could argue that because it destroys the planet, that's pretty powerful. But someone could counter argue that it's not really what it's supposed to do. It's more that it gets twisted to do that. And I would say, I don't think that there is a old one artifact that you could give to a character to use as a weapon that would be more deadly than the Sword of Cain, because you can't really get more deadly than that. You just kind of equal it, which you could argue that there are some that equal it, but I wouldn't say that there are any that are stronger, where I would put it in like, oh, this is S class, but the Sword of Cain is only A class. Like the Sword of Cain is always S class.
Yeah, pretty much. And broadly, I agree. The word stronger there is very difficult to use when it comes to old one artifacts, particularly when you're dealing with, say, hey, this is the artifact that moved the planets.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, how do you compare that to a sword? I mean,
right.
They don't really compare. It's not just like saying, oh, on one hand, we've got oranges. On the other side, we have apples. It's more like, on one hand, we've got stars. On the other side, we've got Snickers bars. They're just completely different things. Which one's tastier? Ooh. But which one's more powerful? More powerful what? For my hunger? Or are we just talking power? They're very, very different things.
Marathi, how many old one goodies do you think I've collected? A shitload. I would say Marathi probably has the Marathi would probably be in the top 3 of the largest old one artifact collections outside of Lestria. I would be willing to wager that.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, we're all cut up. So if Andy's got a little intro for
Should
us,
we
we'll do
go?
that, and then we'll hop into it.
I'm just having a quick check at the time. Yeah, my intro this time, because I'm fully aware that this is one of Sotek's favorite subjects. Because after all, we are discussing the Lizardmen, and we are discussing something that is very close to the Lizardmen. I'm not going to delve deep into a long chat about every single last Old One artifact that's ever existed, largely because there's too many of them. But I will take a brief let's say tour through time as we go all the way back and start with, where did the concept of the Old One artifact come from? Heck, it's pretty much from the beginning. We go all the way back to Warhammer 1st Edition. We go all the way back in time to the very first book, Forces of Fantasy, or the very first compendium where Kremlo was introduced. And yeah, I went there. We have got ourselves the earliest iterations of the Slann. And the Slann, at this point, are already kind of sort of connected to the Old Ones, but not quite. Their empire, the Great Slann Empire, which is down in Lustria, as it's described then, is not the oldest empire in the Old World, or indeed the Warhammer world. The oldest empire at this point is the Elves. The Slann Empire, which were the frog people of this point, was just an ancient one that was decimated by disease when the elves first arrived there. This changed very, very quickly. As we move from Warhammer 1st into 2nd, and then slowly but surely expand the lore out for the Warhammer world, and then hit 3rd, the Slann have completely changed. They are already children of the Old Ones. In many respects, the Slann may even be the Old Ones in these earlier editions, who have devolved into this frog tribe basic species. And they have already, by this point, all the way back at 2nd edition Warhammer, artifacts of the Old Ones. But they're not the only ones. Artifacts of the Old Ones in these early editions pop up all over the place. And most famously, they pop up with the Amazons. The Amazons are a species of human that you find down, strangely enough, in the equivalent of Warhammer's Amazon Basin called, strangely enough, the Amazons. It's almost like, who'd have thought they copy paste things from the real world. And the Amazons of Lustria had Old One technology. Most of the time, these Old One technology, these Old One artifacts were marked as artifact of Old One. And then it was, quite literally, a las pistol. Pew! Pew, 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 pew. And I'm not just saying it sort of looked like a las pistol. It might have been a las pistol. No, it was a las pistol from 40k. It was just copy-pasted straight over. The art was used. Ping, ping. The original art for the Amazons with the las pistols have freaking las pistols. And this early iteration of Warhammer, this is now Warhammer 3 and Warhammer 40k first edition, was common because back in this era, so we're talking late 80s, early 90s, as 40k is coming out, it was very common to find a mixture of Warhammer and 40k slamming together in a variety of ways. We had Old One artifacts that basically were power fists, chain swords, and similar, but wrapped up in this almost fantasy realm version. Why was that? Because 40k and Warhammer were the same setting at that point. They were basically one big area that they could use together and connect through the warp. And that's loosely how it worked. Because if we look at Warhammer, it was never fantasy per se, in the same way that 40k was never science fiction. Warhammer has always been a post-apocalyptic sci-fi in some respects. It used to be a proper sci-fi setting with Old Ones that came in silver spaceships, brought technology and moved the worlds using their artifacts, and moved the worlds closer to the sun and changed the Warhammer world into what we know today. And then their technology fucked up. Blew up, in fact, causing the Chaos Gates to erupt with chaos all over the place. The Chaos Gods came, and everything that once was lost, leaving artifacts spread across the world. That old scientific world is now left as nothing more than crazy artifacts. And in early Warhammer, those artifacts were most commonly used as 40k artifacts. High tech in fantasy. However, this was to change, and it was going to change significantly. And it was going to change significantly for the same reasons that we've discussed in many previous streams, because Warhammer began to have its own unique identity, and so did 40k. And they split them very much in the studio and said, Warhammer's Warhammer, 40k's 40k, they don't mix! No! Meaning that as we move into the 4th edition of Warhammer, and particularly the 5th, the idea that the old slan used 40k stuff was put on the down low. I mean, it wasn't forgotten, but it's put on the edge. And then as we hit the 5th edition, we got ourselves our first Lizardmen army lists. And the Lizardmen army lists completely rebuilt all of the Lizardmen and the Slan, where before the Slan were basically the devolved version of the old ones. The Slan, the big toad figures, were instead, at this point, arguably brought across space and time to the Warhammer world, and new spawnings were created. In the 5th edition, it wasn't that Slan were spawned on Warhammer, it was strongly hinted that they had come from other worlds, that they had been spawned elsewhere using ancient, weird, old one tech, and then brought over here and new spawnings created in the Warhammer world, creating new Slan, their 2nd, their 3rd, their 4th generations, and so on. But the same basic story was in place. The old ones brought tech, chaos came, everything exploded, and all the old one tech was no longer truly understood. And the Slan were now the ancient holders of most of this technology, and should the Amazons ever pop up again, presumably because they're in the same part of the world, they might get access to that stuff too. And it's going to be weird and esoteric and almost certainly South American coded, rather than a chainsword or a power sword. It's going to be different. It's going to be a great engine, a weird artifact, perhaps a glowing ball with weird runes spinning around it and a weird face that looks a bit like a toad in a square stone rune, perhaps attached to an ancient plaque that looks like it might be a touch techie, but not very much. At this point, most of their tech's quite Stone Age, but this changes significantly as we move through the editions of Warhammer, particularly if we go, let's skip through time, up to 8th edition, where they have properly high-teched up their Lizardmen. The Lizardmen, to begin with, were basically almost Stone Age people dropping stones on Be'lakor. Whee! Drop stones! And their weapons were really low tech. But as we move into the 8th edition, we now have pyramids with glowing blue streams along them, casting sky beams into the air. We have weird engines of the gods sitting up top, giant dinosaurs getting wheeled out and firing effectively gigantic space fucking lasers across the battlefield. The change of the Lizardmen was all about slowly but surely adding more old one technology to what was, to begin with, just a bunch of relatively rustic Lizardmen using often obsidian weapons or stone weapons or some equivalent. And they kind of tech them up with each edition until eventually we get the 8th edition, which if you play Total War, you'll know and love, and you'll be quite used to those sky beams sitting up pointing into the ruins of whatever it is of the skies and the heavens. But this was not the only old one tech that we were going to get, because as the editions slowly moved through, 6th edition made a couple of relatively
Sorry, carry on.
Over. No,
Yeah.
I had to laugh as well because it's genuinely funny. In 6th edition, we had a couple of interesting new additions. I'm only going to bring up two, from two games in particular. One is Warhammer, and the other one is Mordheim. In Warhammer, we got ourselves a campaign. Now, you might not know this, but during the 6th edition in particular, Games Workshop ran big summer campaigns every year to effectively support their big games, 40k and Warhammer. And one of these campaigns was Dark Shadows, which was an enormous campaign centered around Albion, and it was run by Gav Thorpe. And this campaign involved Albion being rewritten as almost a center of Old One power and technology, and also a center of a new religion, which was also, as it turned out, an old religion. Effectively, it was the Druids, the old faith being rewritten, brought up to date with their truth speakers. And these old ones, the ancient tech that they had access to, had been largely lost. It was now replaced with a megalithic style of technology, almost like the 5th edition Lizardmen, as they'd been pushed in. But, yeah, as that that campaign kicked off, and every army around the world fell on that place to, again, kick in Be'lakor, because we all know Be'lakor's at the center of all major campaigns. And yes, there was lots of big stones there, so he was in trouble. Ultimately,
if only he could get away from those damn stones. Yeah,
those damn stones. Yeah, totally. The big mega henges in this particular case. Albion got a whole bunch of special little artifacts, and I think there's about 2001, probably around about November, December time, something like that. Because this is before I was working for Games Workshop it was after I was working for them for the second time, but before I was working for Black Library. So it's in that area. So I'm going to guess about 2001 late-ish. And White Dwarf brought out an Artifacts of the Old One article to support their campaign, which sounds super cool. I think I might have even a little list of the artifacts over here. The treasures of the old ones as they were marked.
It is one of the silliest magic item lists I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, so we could say somewhat charitably thank Gav Thorpe for this article, and in there we have things like gauntlets of power, or mystic shields of light, or divine eyes, or claws of devastation. These are, if we're just to cut away all of the prosaic language, power fists. They've got power claws. They've got chain swords. They've got thunder fists and thunder shield. Storm shields. Pardon me. And they're just getting repurposed for Warhammer. They went all the way back to the 3rd edition style of Old One artifacts were 40k tech, and they just respun it. And that was kind of cool and kind of fun and kind of stupid, kind of goofy, and it kind of went against where the Lizardmen had kind of been going. But nevertheless, it was a fun little article. But was this the last? No. No, it wasn't. This is something that will be pretty much a theme that underpins anyone using Old One tech inside Warhammer. Whenever they bring it up, they go, and you know what, actually, rather than have a little think about what it might do, it's just a 40k thing. Outside of the army list, this is. If we go to the Lizardmen army list, they create new shit that very much thematically fits. But if we say, for example, go over to Mordheim and take a look at Town Crier and how they presented their Amazons. The Amazons in early editions of Warhammer, really early, we're talking all the way back, late 80s, early 90s, were quite literally bedecked with crazy artifacts that were pure 40k. Blast pistols, chainswords, plasma pistols. You get the idea. And they did a gang in Town Crier. This is probably going to be around about 2002-ish, I'm going to guess, somewhere around there. So it's after Gav's article has been written. And the Amazons inside Mordheim had Old One artifacts. Guess what they were? You can't guess. Yeah, they were 40k guns. Woo! Pew, pew, pew. Because it was almost thematically appropriate for them to have them. And even though Amazons in later versions kind of dropped that aspect to it, I think it's almost a bit of a shame, because the idea of them having ancient tech spun up is good. It just needs to be repurposed and built up in a way that feels like it's Old One tech rather than 40k tech, which is kind of what they do typically. So the Amazons repurposed them in that fashion, and we got our quick pew 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 Old One tech being again a 40k representation. And you'll find that whenever this happens in Warhammer, so for example, I get access to an Old One artifact outside of the core Lizardmen army lists, it's always 40k tech. Pretty much. I mean, some later novels might, go down a far more Lizardman route, because they're Lizardman novels and they're speaking to the Lizardman army lists. But if they're just picking up a random thing, they will often reference 40k. And that's for two reasons. One, 40k is popular, and it's always fun to reference the popular thing so that the Warhammer people can say, oh, that thing, I recognize it, and point at it. That's a power sword. It's kind of fun. It's kind of cool. It's a little bit goofy, but it's also, if it's done well, fun. And we like fun. It's a game. The background's all made up. This is cool. And that's okay. But if we stick with just the Old One tech as it's presented in the Lizardmen army list and all of its attending literature, whether it's games that use Lizardmen or whether it's novels that use Lizardmen, we get a second type of Old One artifact. And the second type of Old One artifact is the big fucking world engines. It's the ancient tech that allows them to access paths of the Old Ones. It's the weird spinning discs that present all manner of strange, weird, ancient, celestial Lizardman garbage that often doesn't make a great deal of sense to the people who are attempting to use it because it's written in ancient glyphs and runes that they don't understand. And not even the Slan themselves, as they sit there contemplating these ancient artifacts, truly get what they're doing. And that's the second style. Ancient tech from a previous technological era often being misused and misunderstood, and ultimately, if we move towards the end times, used to destroy the world. So, my conclusion for my Old One...
Ending on that positive note.
Yeah, on that positive world, is that Old One tech is, broadly speaking, one of two things. On one side, we've got 40k tech, which is just ported in because it's fun, it's funny, and it's exactly what you would expect, although sometimes some authors will give it a bit of a twist to try and hide the fact that it's quite clearly a 40k artifact. Or alternatively, as we move from the 5th edition of Warhammer onwards, Old One tech took a very different tone. It wasn't just simply a high technological era, and we represent that using 40k stuff. It was instead a high technological era that was so beyond anyone's ability to understand that everybody doesn't. And it's all used wrong. And it's weird and it's arcane and it is tremendously powerful. The small fragments that they're managed to pull together by the Lizardmen is powerful enough that they can not only defend cities, but defend the world itself from extraterrestrial issues. And believe it or not, they exist in Warhammer in a variety of ways, including that giant Chaos Moon that wanders around out there, which Old One tech is used to try and keep back, along with many a ritual. But world-ending devices, because ultimately the greatest example that we can possibly say is that the Chaos Gates themselves are artifacts of the Old Ones. And that shows not just the power, but the danger of what they can potentially represent. So, where will we start, Loremaster of Sotek? And yes, I call myself Sotek Hammer because, you know, it's technological, it's tech. It's like, it's so tech, man. I couldn't resist myself. I have indeed put the name Sotek Hammer up for myself today. A shit pun. I'm down with it. Let's go.
Yeah, so first thing I'm gonna do is get caught up in super chats and stuff, and then we are going to start just plowing our way through different areas of the Warhammer world and all the stuff. We'll start with Lizardmen because there's a lot of big things to hit there. A lot of bizarre things and some genuinely interesting aspects of their story. Gets very heavily bound up in their relationships to these artifacts. So we'll get on that. Fortune Crescent. Thankful finds a random Old One artifact. How many Skaven die? A shitload. An absolute shitload. That is almost the plot of the first Thankful book, though technically it's not an Old One artifact. But if you want to know like how bad things get when Thankful gets near a powerful artifact, that book is a good reference. Mr. Board, is it possible that Kurt Helborg's mustache is an Old One artifact? You know, if that's, I don't think that the Old Ones necessarily were particularly into grandiose displays of facial hair, but perhaps they were.
I mean,
they were.
Who can say for certain? I mean, over on Discord, there was some fun comments beforehand saying the true artifacts of the Old Ones were the miniatures from the 90s.
I saw the Doom Divers.
Yeah, the Doom Divers got shared there, which amused me no end. That was from Islington. Yeah, that amused me no end because, in many respects, yes, the artifacts of the Old Ones are old miniatures because that's how they made artifacts of the Old Ones for Warhammer. They took old miniatures from 40k and ported over their bits and put them into Warhammer.
Oh, so, yeah. That's the real truth is you can use your 40k bits in fantasy now. Woohoo!
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why it happened.
Cole Patterson, thank you for becoming a member. I appreciate that. Thank you for the support. Charles CK, what level of awareness of the technological advancement of the Lizardmen do the old world races have? Do they not know the Lizardmen at all? Think them animals? So, so this question actually gets a little tricky because the editions of Warhammer have treated it very differently, and they have done a surprisingly good job of not like correcting or retconning it. It's just that you tend to get different opinions from different parts of the old world. Where like probably the book that did it the best as far as like really trying to give this vibe was if you got the 6th edition Big Red book, which was the core rule book. The lore section on all the armies is written from one guy's perspective. Yeah. And it's just him like doing sketches of the various factions. It's very cool. It's very thematic. But because of it, it's a little funny because you get surprisingly no info on certain factions because he doesn't know about them, and the Lizardman is one of them. Where he basically says something along the lines of that, like he's like, "Well, I'm a very educated individual, so I know all these stories about walking intelligent lizard creatures from the jungles of Lustria is complete nonsense, and the creatures that have been brought back are obviously botched together from a combination of different creatures, and it's all stupid bullshit." So most of the people in the old world, if they think Lustria, they think ancient gold. They think, oh, there's some ruins over there, there's lots of money, there's wealth to be had, and anyone that goes over there is probably an idiot because people die. And when stories do come back, they're horrible. And if anyone were to say something along the lines of there's really powerful artifacts and technology over there, everyone else would look at that guy and go, that dude's fucking crazy. He's insane. Like those are ancient ruins where there's lots of stuff like valuable metals, sure. But anything more precious than that, ridiculous.
Yeah, broadly speaking, I agree completely. The background, it does go through a few shifts, particularly when there's a clear desire to show how all the armies can fight each other. Mm-hmm. And they then will create some new background or some new character or some new situation where the Lizardmen are suddenly front and center. For example, if we take a look at the Dark Shadows campaign that I mentioned in the introduction,
right?
All of the armies were pulled into Albion, either by the Truthsayers or the prophets of Bellicor, effectively, who were corrupted Truthsayers, popping in and saying, come over to Albion and do the thing. And Lizardmen were popping up because of the ancient Old One artifacts that may be there, and they were turning up, and suddenly everyone was meeting everyone and doing everything. In a similar fashion, if we go back to 5th edition Warhammer, the Bretonnians were pretty much faced off against the Lizardmen as a core component of that box set even happening. Or was that start 6th? No, that was 5th.
That was 5th.
That was 5th. So that was Bretonnians versus Lizardmen in 5th edition box set. And they were given like a whole new city and a whole new area to campaign in, way out on the very fringe of the old world. And suddenly all the information that was beforehand pretty much isolated, no one ever talked. They were suddenly in each other's faces and very aware of each other. And then it gets forgotten by the next book. So loosely speaking, I agree with Sotek entirely. The core setting says no one knows nothing. Lustria is weird and strange and it's over there and we don't understand it. But there's tons of examples, and I do mean loads of them, bags of them, of people who do know. Lots of individuals, lots of weird stories, lots of single places where Lizardmen have demonstrated their ability and word clearly could potentially get out from there.
Yeah, and like and it's one of those things where obviously there will always be exceptions. Like, I mean, even in 8th edition, they released a Storm of Magic book, and the Storm of Magic book has this really silly thing that happened very recently, like in the 2500s, where a Lizardman army got teleported by a Storm of Magic outside Averheim, and then they attack Averheim. And then the storm ends and the Lizardmen get teleported back out, and everyone was like, what the fuck is that?
That's the thing that happens.
Yeah, so there's always weird exceptions and stuff, but
Yep, agreed.
Nil, Section of the Strings I'll have to watch later. Oh, well, appreciate you coming by.
Stuff.
Thank you. Necromancer Cobalt, Old One tech idea, a vault with every retcon thing or race chrono-locked as the place as a museum. No one knows how, but it's collecting more stuff. So just Trazen is kicking around in fantasy. No one's seen him yet, is basically what this is.
I've sort of done this in game. In that I had an artifact that was responsible for effectively timelines. And timelines were one method of understanding how Warhammer could be both this and that in pure contradiction. And the answer to that was Old One Tech in this individual circumstance in that one campaign. I've answered that same question in a different way in another campaign, but Old One Tech is one way that you could answer why Warhammer is different in different versions through the various editions of the game. And that's that Old One Tech was deployed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this could 100% be a thing.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be that big of a stretch. Is there Necron tech? Give an Old One Nemesis and 40k. So I will note that when you tend to see 40k tech pop up in fantasy, there's no like, oh, they only use Imperium or they only use Eldar. It's just 40k.
40K.
So it's literally anything from 40k could pop up somewhere.
So the answer to this is yes, and indeed the answer to this in one of my old campaigns was not only yes, that this was an old Necron world in one of my campaigns.
Yeah, sure.
Because and there was all manner of Necron shit sitting beneath the surface, particularly down in Nehekara, where they had influenced strongly the early Nehekaran civilization as they unearthed
Nehekara was built by aliens. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it was the great secret that the Knights Panther discovered when they went down to the Eye of the Panther in Araby. And they had found out that there was, in fact, technology working in the Eye of the Panther. That was a stupid story. But you tend to find that Warhammer is all about stupid stories sometimes, where they take different aspects and they justify them in different ways. And as each edition goes by, what was previously thought to be stupid suddenly becomes the norm, or what was previously thought to be cool becomes stupid. And that's just how Warhammer works.
Yeah. I will say it's one of those things. This is a good example of, you can see this in Total War as well, where I think sometimes people can have a little bit of understandable shock when they see like what Nagash's Black Pyramid gets turned into by the end times, which Total War kind of takes and runs with, where you look and you go, that's a very futuristic looking flying pyramid you got there, Nagash.
100%. And I justified that rather crazy outcome by making it effectively a tomb world of the Necrons.
Yeah, so, you know, if
Good
you're playing
times.
Wolfrup and your players are getting snooty against Amazons or something, you can always have them bring out a Gauss flare, because why not?
I had that. I literally had that happen in one of my games, and it was awful. It was good times.
Awesome. Hammond, what would Batman's contingency for Lizardmen be to make the world much colder? It would devastate them, because Batman. Freeze tech, ice tech.
Yep.
Fred Slipknot 9, thank you both for your hard work. Oh, thank you. Andy, please do more city building streams in the future. They are awesome.
Yeah, I do need to finish off that Callaghan stream, which sort of stopped because I forgot everything that I did in the Callaghan stream. And I was doing that on Thursdays. And you know what, Fred Slipknot, I think I want to finish it, particularly because it would be quite useful to actually have for my game as well. So yeah, I think possibly diving back into that would be a good idea.
Yeah, and in June, I'm saying it now, in June we will finish Lacottle as well, which is the Lisbon city.
Well. Yeah.
Which is almost done, to be fair. Hannibal, evening, gents. Are there any artificial beings in Warhammer? The undead have constructs and such, but are there any true AI-type non-biological beings? Yes. They're kicking around. It gets super weird depending on how deep you want to go. Dwarf runic guardians can get pretty crazy. To the point, Tomb King constructs can get kind of wild, especially when some of them are not undead. Some of them are, like the Ushapti, do not have people in them. They are they're supposedly animated by the gods, and nobody knows what makes the Necrosphinxes work, which is why the Tomb Kings are terrified of them. They literally have no idea why those things are sentient. Yeah, sure. So, but there are absolutely robot AI type entities that exist within the setting. 100%.
I'm kind of glad you brought up the Fenbeast 47 KKR, because they're also from the Dark Shadows campaign in Albion. The Fenbeasts were created
I love
for
Fenbeasts.
that. And the Fenbeasts are basically just golems of the land pulled out from the marshes. That's a quick way of putting it. And they're magical constructs, and typically where the word AI would be used inside a sci-fi setting. Magical construct, or alternatively there's a spirit put inside it, or some equivalent, is used in fantasy. Now 40k, it being a fantasy as well, often uses the concept of the machine spirit and similar, and that's for their tech. Warhammer tech often uses similar things, particularly because demons are known for possessing machinery of various types. Take a look at the demon engines, for example, of the Chaos Dwarfs.
Yeah.
And they're not the only examples that exist, but they're the best examples. Khorne has a bunch of them also.
Yeah, the Terracotta Sentinels of the Celestial Emperor. Yeah, those are big time.
100%.
Yeah, so, the Kadai Fireboard, Kadai Destroyers are basically that. Yeah.
And I would probably suggest that there is somewhere several Old One artifacts that would be effectively what we would describe as AI technologies. But they would be seen through a fantasy lens under most circumstances, and they wouldn't be understood for exactly what they are. People wouldn't look at it and say, "Aha, I found a piece of technology," that they expect it to be a spirit that was stuck in there and was somehow trying to communicate, or similar. So yes is the answer, and it manifests in many different ways.
Hammond, if the anti-life equation existed in Warhammer, would the Tomb Kings, Undeath, and Lizardmen be affected? What about elves, dragons, both, and other species? I don't really know what the anti-life equation is, other than Darkseid really wants it. That's literally all I know about the anti-life equation, is that Darkseid wants it real, real bad, and if he gets it, bad things happen. So I don't know what it actually does. But presumably...
So, having just read it up, they'd all be fucked. Because it is a mathematical formula, transcendental at that affects sentience, not life. Okay, and because it affects sentience, yeah, they'd pretty much all be fucked. But it being comic book based, there is always a kryptonite based written into these things. So there would be those who would be unaffected, and the most obvious option would probably be undead or something similar.
Yep. Mads Christensen, are there other dwarf friends that Malekith... Are there other dwarf friends than Malekith, Sigmar, and Felix Jaeger? If so, who are they? So they... Are there others? Yes. Do we know that many? No. They're pretty rare, which they should be. But they also kind of fall under that. They'll just kind of show up when a writer decides to throw one in, as opposed to there being like a standardized list anywhere. But they should be used very infrequently, because dwarves don't like to hand that out.
This is something that the roleplay book should just nail down, because roleplay is where we get to look at the added detail. So a dwarf book, if it introduces the concept of dwarf friend, it needs to describe what it is. So it needs to say a dwarf friend is someone who is respected for blah, 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 blah. They go into the whole concept. And then they need to provide examples so that the players of the game, whether it's the GM or the players who are reading it, can go, this is what it is, that's what was done to get it, and that's the benefits that were received because of it. Without that, it means nothing. It's just a fable. It's just a very difficult thing to pin down. And as it currently stands, Warhammer kind of almost takes that route, in that it's this mythic weird thing that writers use to show that that character's special. And the dwarfs have marked them out as special. And that means that you as the reader can go, ooh, they're special. They're dwarf friends. Ooh. Where the roleplay book should go to town now. I haven't read the most recent dwarfy one, so I'm not sure if they have done that. But if they haven't, they should have.
I was
You're looking at the background right now, are you?
Yeah, so, I would
hope, given that there's been some recent dwarf material done, that's it, because a core component of roleplay writing is not just saying that things exist, it shows you how to use the things. Because all of the writing that you have in a roleplay book isn't about, understanding the world per se. It's about using the world. And if you can't use the world, then the material that you're presenting is, to a degree, useless. Now, you might go, well, that means all the history is useless because you can't use that. Wrong. History is a core component of understanding the peoples of the current time. And how history impacts people in the current time can be, again, shown how it can be used in adventure hooks or various dungeons that could be explored or whatever else. So
the words show up in here, but I'm not. There's some mentions of it. I don't know how in depth they go for it, but at least it's mentioned in the book.
Cool. Okay, so mention is good, but mention without deep discussion as to how to use, not necessarily quite so good. But that's where it should be covered. But as it currently stands, the only time that it gets properly used is when Games Workshop themselves are highlighting a character, which is why it's only like Malekith, Sigmar, Felix Jaeger, et al. That ever have it attached to them.
Yep. So it might be in there somewhere, but yeah, I haven't looked at it yet. All right.
We'll find
Watchdog 3079. In earlier versions, do you think Amazons would have been intended as a partner race of the Lizardmen like ogres and Noblars, though they're far less abusive? No. And I'll say that because Amazons go way back, like way back. And in every version, they've always shown up as a strange relationship with the other races of Lustria. Where
they are another group.
Yeah, they're just another group, and they've always been that. Like, even when you're dealing with like 8th edition all the way back to 3rd edition, the Amazons are around, and they are always described as like they are as likely to ally with the Lizardmen as they are to kill them, and vice versa.
And given variously different backgrounds as well, which is always funny. Loosely speaking, originally, for example, the Lizardmen and the Slan were two completely separate groups. The troglodytic Lizardmen who were cold-blooded and lived underneath the ground, the Slan who lived in the jungles and ran around in tribes.
The Lizardmen were the partner race.
And they weren't a partner race then, but then they got put together. And the Slan and the Lizardmen became one, but the Amazons were always separate to that. So, no, I don't think that they would sit in as a good addendum to the Lizardmen army list. It's not like, say, for example, the Halflings in the Empire. The Halflings should pretty much always be a potential add-on to the Empire army list. They often forget that. They've done it through the editions. It was definitely there in the 4th edition. It was definitely there in previous editions. But as we look at the Empire as a whole, it's often forgotten, although they always mention them. Oh, there's the Moot. We still haven't deleted it. So there's still Halflings in Warhammer. They're still there somewhere. But they get forgotten. The Amazons are not like that. They're not this group that live within Lustria as part of the Lizardmen framework. They are their own unique faction.
Yeah, I mean, they got their own freaking island, their own temples. Like they're very isolated
their
from
own
everyone.
army list as well at one point.
Yeah, hey man, golems are AI. That's Sotek.
That's what I wrote for my name, Sotek.
Good lord.
I agree, Hammond.
So speaking of Sotek and Sotek, over to Lustria.
Segue.
Yeah, where we've got our glorious Lizardmen. So 8th edition was a really interesting time for the Lizardmen as a whole, because in prior editions we had old one technology, but it was very rare, and it was mostly relegated to magic items, and that was it. And it very rarely came outside of that. And then we started to see a little bit of creep towards the end of 6th edition, where the Lustria book came out. And the Lustria was a campaign supplement that came out, and it added 2 new factions to the game, which was a very dense clan pestilence, most of which didn't actually ever return after that book, which was a shame.
Such a shame, because there was some really cool stuff.
Yeah, but the Lizardmen stuff introduced things that became staples for the Lizardmen, the most famous of which was the Engine of the Gods.
Engine of the Gods.
And the Engine of the Gods is kind of where we'll start with. Of that, when it was first introduced, it was a little funny because it was a very elaborate kit bash. It didn't have an official mini. And it was basically, the story went that Tehenowyn, as a way to sort of, because he went from being teeny weeny, who was a bit of a goof, to Tehenowyn, who was a much more serious character. And Tahanowin, as part of trying to showcase of what a badass he is, his story basically goes that the way he kind of takes the war against the Skaven to the next step is that throughout the 100-year war of the Rat and Serpent, there's a time where he basically goes on an exodus out into the jungles by himself, and he comes back leading what at the time was an Arcanodon, which was a brand new long neck type dinosaur that eventually just got replaced with an ancient Stegodon. But he leads this big dinosaur out with this insane, crazy piece of Old One technology on its back. And the original one was basically that it had like a bunch of interlocking circles, and they'd spin around really fast, and it'd create like a little miniature sun, and it would shoot it like a catapult and just obliterate whatever it landed on. And people loved it. It was a super fucking cool idea, and people thought it was really cool. So in 7th edition, they brought it back, but they brought back an actual standardized version with a mini. And the Engine of the Gods was changed and made a bit more consistent and a bit more of a not only a damage dealing weapon, but also a support piece. And this is where we see it. This is where they introduce what the Lizardmen really understand with Old One tech, which is the fun thing about the Lizardmen that I really, really like about them is that the Lizardmen don't actually know how Old One tech works. They don't. Like there are a couple of select individuals that have some pretty good ideas about some pieces. But the 8th edition book actually makes a really cool note of this, of that to the Lizardmen have kind of devolved and forgotten so much that they treat most Old One tech through ritual. So they perform complex rituals that have, frankly, probably nothing to do with how the machine actually operates. But at some point through the ritual, they will do some kind of sequence that actually operates the machinery. Yes, very similar to the Adeptus Mechanicus. Like there is, so like one of the examples they gave in the 8th edition book is that the Lizardmen have a weapon that's known as the, I think it's the Sun Staff of Sotek, which looks like just this big staff with sun imagery on it. And the Lizardmen know that if they hold the staff in a particular way and they invoke a select amount of words, it shoots a beam of sunlight that just melts, just destroys whoever happens to be standing in front of it.
Freaking laser beam.
Yeah. And you go, oh, neat. Yeah. So the Engine of the Gods, when it got standardized, became this big throne-looking piece that had all these elaborate inner workings in it. And it allows the Lizardmen to control the winds of magic. It allows them to direct it in a way that they see fit. It can absorb it, and then it lets out these blasts of power. And the blast of power was particularly interesting because it talked about how it would radiate out a wave of light that would not harm the Lizardmen. It would ignore the Lizardmen, but anything else would get incinerated. And it was particularly effective against creatures of an etheric nature. And this included demons, forest spirits, undead. So anything that required magic in order to kind of function would take bonus damage, which was a very interesting rule. It wasn't like an unusual rule. There were a lot of rules like that. Like the Lore of Light, for instance, was good against anything magically natured.
Yet more lasers.
Yeah. So, but it also could let out a bit of a bubble that protected units that were being attacked by various forces because it was projecting like an energy shield. Which there was a lot of. I actually remember when the 7th edition Lizardmen book came out, because the whole bubble of the Stegodon, there was a lot of memes about the Gungans from the Star Wars prequel trilogy with their bubbles from the dinosaurs. That was a very popular meme at the time about the Lizardmen 7th edition army book. But the thing that got really, really interesting, in my opinion, when it came to Old One technology, and I think where Games Workshop really hit their stride on the Lizardmen's relationship with it, was 8th edition with the introduction of the solar engine. And the reason is, so the solar engines, if you're not familiar with them, are these big yellow solar crystals that are put on the backs of these new creatures they introduced called Bastillodons. which is of course a play on they are a Bastille and a dinosaur because they are just big tanks. And these crystals would literally absorb sunlight and then would convert it using the winds of magic, likely actually, to turn it into this nightmarishly strong fire beam that would just fuck up anybody in front of it with just crazy amounts of magical fire damage. If you rolled lucky. If you rolled poorly, it would kind of spurt out a little sad thing. But most of the time, I think on like a 4+, it would absolutely melt somebody's face in front of them. But Games Workshop did something super clever, which is that when they designed the mini, the way the solar engine was designed is there's an activation plate on the back of it. And Games Workshop very deliberately designed it where it's a press plate that's supposed to be pressed by putting your hand on it, but it has 5 fingers. But skinks only have, and all lizardmen only have 4. And this was actually deliberately called out in the article they put out on whatever they used to have for Warhammer Community back then. But when they released the mini, they actually deliberately pointed out that the lizardmen don't actually have the right amount of fingers to use it, but they're able to use it for destructive purposes. And like the heat it gives off invigorates the lizardmen around them. But one of the things they point out within that article that's so great is that because of the fact that it's got the 5 fingers on it, and the fact that the lizardmen don't actually know what it was meant to do, the lizardmen in many ways are kind of abusing the technology, not intentionally, but the most likely thing when you're looking at it is that this was not its intended purpose. This is not what this engine is supposed to be used for. It's just a use that the lizardmen have found for it. And that is a staggering amount of the old one tech that you find in the Lizardmen army list, is these bizarre, cool pieces of tech that the Lizardmen have found out how to use for war, because obviously it's Warhammer. But the tragic part is that if you really think carefully about what the tech is doing, you can often actually come up with ways that it might be wielded for non-war purposes, but the Lizardmen don't think of it that way. They're already not the most creative race in a lot of ways. But they are so stunted by how this stuff works. Another great example of like a piece of old one tech I really, really like is there's this thing called the Dragonfly of Quicksilver. And it's a little robot, literally. It's a robot in the shape of a dragonfly that's made of a material the lizardmen can only think of to call Quicksilver because it's such an advanced metal. And it's a metallic automaton that flies around and can scout for information and communicate info back to the lizardmen, which is such a insanely fascinating, sophisticated piece of tech. And the only thing the lizardmen can think to use it for is scouting deployment. And not because the lizardmen don't think about how it works like a human would, right? Where a human or a dwarf or an elf might be like, how do I take this apart and how do I recreate this and make more of these? The lizardmen just go, oh, I have this thing. And it does this purpose after I do this little chant or I do this hand maneuver or I say these words, and they pass that information down from generation to generation. But one of the things I really love about the 8th edition book as well is it adds that when the lizardmen are passing information down from generation to generation, they often add unnecessary steps due to misunderstandings. So they end up making more and more elaborate rituals, as skinks in particular have a really bad habit of being like, oh, well, when I use this artifact, I made sure to say these words, and then I looked to make sure the sun was at this particular time of day, and then I also blinked 3 times, and I was facing north. And so the scribe that's recording on how to do this for future generations go, oh, okay, so you need to face north. It has to be when the sun is in this alignment. You have to blink 3 times. You have to say these words. And oh, now that I think about it, it's raining right now. So like it only works when it rains. And it just keeps adding to layers. So there's all these layers of mysticism to it. Where most of the old one tech that the Lizardmen use, for instance, that isn't like a very straightforward weapon, which I'll give some examples of those, are the actual functioning part, like the thing that makes them truly activate, is usually left up to mystery because you don't know which of the steps is actually the crucial one, which is fun.
Yeah, agree completely. And from all of that, I'm only going to pull out one detail, which I think we often focus on, but I'd like to highlight it just to say that it doesn't say what you necessarily think. And that's part of the fun of world building in general. And that's that 5-fingered splat on the engine. And the first thought that many people have whenever they see that is that the skinks don't know how to use it properly. They've got their 4 fingers, they slap it in, and they're only on one side like that. And that means then that the old ones must have had 5 fingers. No, it doesn't at all. But it does mean that who functioned that machine likely had 5 fingers. Indeed, if you want to build a different story, you could easily say that these machines were first built for humans or elves or another species entirely. All of that makes sense because Old One tech does not mean tech that was used by the old ones. It means tech that came from the time of the old ones. Much of it may have been built by one of their servitor species. Much of it may have been built by possibly the old ones themselves, but most likely by their servitor species. A clear example of that was one of the justifications I used for the building of Nippon that we did over in LAWhammer, was to show how humans were a core component of what the old ones were doing back then as well. So I'm just pulling out that one because Old One artifacts are not necessarily artifacts used by old ones. What they are is artifacts from the time and the era of the old ones. And just because something looks like it may have been made for humans and thus, oh, does that mean old ones are just humans then? Absolutely not. It in no way gives you any evidence about the old ones themselves, but it does give you a lot of evidence for the type of world that they were living in at the time.
Yeah, like an easy example I could think of off the top of my head is that, remember, the Warhammer world used to be mostly polar ice caps, used to be mostly covered in frost. If you had a species of warm-blooded creatures that you needed to survive in very cold environments, the solar engine would have been absolutely perfect for that, absorbing a distant sun's rays and providing warmth.
Yeah, agree completely. And if you've not seen that, I posted a quick image over on my Discord. So that's sitting over in the Lorebeards chat one, just in case you want to have a look at what that looks like. It's an easy image, and you can see the Lizardman there with his hand stamped up against that machine. So where are we going next?
Some other artifacts I do want to call out, because there are some very, very there's a couple that I find really fascinating, worth of pointing out some of the stuff that Old One Tech was capable of. And once again, how it's being used for literally a space heater. Yeah. Another really good example of a magic item that is now used for war purposes, but likely was used for something else, is the character Tic-Tac-Toe, who I recommended someone play earlier, is a skink who's actually a very cool character who rides around on Pterodon, and he wears this really elaborate, crazy looking mask that's called the Mask of Heavens. And the thing about the Mask of Heavens that is super fascinating is that it allows the wielder or the bearer to literally meld their mind with creatures around them. In the case of the Mask of Heavens, it melds his mind with pterodons so that they become consciously essentially one entity. And he's able to give instant mental commands, see what they see. And when he wants them to do something, they do it instantly. Which, once again, this is something you could see having a lot of very good practical use outside of war or combat scenarios. But because of the way the Warhammer world is, it only is used for, terrible destruction and combat and stuff.
Because Warhammer.
Yeah, that being said, the last couple I want to point out, so there are some genuine just weapons, right? There are some genuine just weapons of the old ones that someone that was asking about, like the Sword of Cain earlier, one of the most terrifying and one that is very explicitly, we've talked about old one weapons back in the old one stream where we talked about like the revered spear of Tlangsha, for instance, or the blazing blade of Chotek and all that. But one of the ones that is a piece of Old One tech the Lizardmen have that has not lost its purpose is the Blade of Realities. And the Blade of Realities is one of the most bonkers, over-the-top, dumbass things. And it's one of the very few weapons that, for a while, its rules felt as stupid as its description is. Which is that it looks at first just kind of like a shimmering Lizardmen style type blade. But what's revealed about it in its lore blurb is that this weapon exists on all planes of reality simultaneously, including within the ether. So if the Lizardmen cut somebody with it or kill someone with it, you just fucking die. Your soul, your etheric presence, everything about you that exists in every possible reality is destroyed. And this was
just as a small interruption there. If you go back to our stream last Wednesday when we were discussing the afterlives, and at one point we had a quick breakdown of the soul as far as Nehekara was concerned. Basically, what the sword there is doing is cutting through each and every part of your soul, on top of everything else that it does as well. But it's cutting through it all, so it's cutting everything, and it's also particularly nasty against demons.
Yeah, it's one of the few, this can perma-kill a demon if it got smacked with it. And its rules were fucking hilarious. I cannot tell you how many tournaments I went to that when you said, I have a Carnosaur Lord with the Blade of Realities, they went, fuck. Especially in 7th edition, where it was, every time you get hit with this weapon, you take a leadership check, and if you fail, you instantly die. You get no saves, no ward saves, doesn't matter how many wounds you have, no matter what your special rules are, you just instant die, fuck you. It's goofy. But the last set of weapons I'll talk about before we kind of move on to some other parts of the world is that there was one final book that came out that decided to take the idea of Old One tech as, I would say in this case, being very heavily abused for not being used in the way it was intended to be used, which was the Dread Saurian from the Monsters Arcanum. Which the Dread Saurian came out and was already a ridiculous model, but because it was so big and goofy and over the top. But they decided, they went, well, what if you could take it and you made it so dumb that people wouldn't want to play with you, and you could give it a set of Old One artifacts. And when you hear about what these artifacts could do, but then what they were used for in battle, it's very funny. Like a good example is Tepok's Crystalline Eye. This one says that supposedly that Tepok, who is said to be an Old One, though the Monster Arcanum makes a goof and calls him a Slan instead. Though you could argue and say maybe he's both. But Tepok is this Crystalline Eye is said to allow the one who is using it properly to call forth the spirits of anyone who has died. To literally summon the souls of the dead and get them to do the user's bidding. What did the Lizardmen do with this incredible piece of insane technology? They strap it on to a big fuck you dinosaur and turn it into a big fuck you ghost dinosaur that becomes ethereal. So it literally can't be affected by anything that's not of a magical nature. It makes this giant, horrible dinosaur essentially turn into a ghost. Because why not? Another example is there's like the blazing configuration of Sotek, which is a powerful piece of Old One technology that when applied onto a set of big armor that they then strap to the Saurian, makes anything that it's strapped to have the ability to become wreathed in flames. But it's also protected against flames. Which to me makes me think of something like entering atmospheres.
What it was actually used for. Totally.
As opposed to turning a big fuck you dinosaur into a flaming comet that flies across the battlefield and kills everyone. Because
cool,
well, yeah, you know, credit where it's due. Another really powerful Old One tech that we learned about is the Golden Shroud of Flascodal, which is when activated, produces this glimmering, gorgeous golden aura of light that when used in a battle scenario, blinds people and repels etheric energies. So it really, really, really fucks with undead and demons and stuff. But you can imagine this thing being used either if you're if you were traveling, say, through the ether, and you needed something to keep the things in the ether away from you, kind of like how the Imperium does with their the Geller fields or whatever. This is functionally that. That it's something meant to dissuade and keep etheric entities away. But it also blinds the shit out of mundane people.
And I think this is something that is a good example of how a lot of the Old One tech manifests, and that is that the writer, the author at hand, thinks, okay, what piece of tech would the Old Ones need? They'd need this. How are the Lizardmen going to fuck that up and use it in a completely different way? And then they create some form of new unit, new monster, new thing out of this. And I think that if you're looking at Old One artifacts, or for example, looking to build your own Lizardman equivalent, that's a really good starting point. Think about what your world's version of the Old Ones were doing and how they were changing the world, and then think about what they needed to do that, and then think about the device that did it, what it took to activate it, to make it do its thing, and then think about what several thousand years worth of misunderstandings, added ritual, and weirdness is going to do to this artifact, which then gets strapped on the back of a giant dinosaur to do something stupid. And that is, I think, part of the fun of the Lizardmen. And if you are out there building your own Lizardman equivalents, do that shit. Because it's fun. It's something that Warhammer offers, which is ancient tech on dinosaurs doing crazy magic shit, which is just too cool not to use. So I strongly recommend, if you're out there going, I'm thinking of maybe taking a journey over to Lustria and thinking of doing, get the crazy shit in. And that is what this stream is about. The Old One artifacts that almost certainly would be on display. And also, if you are doing that, because it's the roleplay game rather than the battle game, you can add extra stories, extra layer, extra depth to justify this thing, and perhaps show that this thing is far, far more dangerous than the Lizardmen ever realized. That this thing could do so much more, because after all, we're dealing with a species that moved worlds, that shifted entire continents, that went to mass warfare across the globe in a way that has been largely, come the modern Warhammer era, forgotten. But those things still exist. And yes, that means that they had equivalents of spiritual stroke physical tanks, et al., on top of all of the Lizardman forces that they were using. So yeah, think about it. How would that manifest? And that's where you're going to get your own cool Old One artifacts to add on to the giant list that already exists inside the Lizardman army list.
Yeah, and then before we move on from Lustria and get caught up with super chats and stuff, the last thing we're talking about is not just the items and the weapons of the Lizardmen, but the places of Lustria, because Lustria is particularly dense and magical, or an Old One tech, mainly thanks to the fact that Lustria is so hostile that it's very, very difficult for people to get in and mess with things. Because one of the things that I think a lot of people forget about the Old Ones is that back in, when, granted, writers forget this a lot too, is that the Old Ones used to control the entire planet. They didn't just control the Southlands and Lustria, they controlled everything. And when they built the geomantic web, much of which has been co-opted by the elves to create, with their waystones or from druidic cultures that put Ogham stones and stuff on them, which is now funnels matched to the vortex, originally didn't do that. But the Old Ones had all these different sites all across the world that all had some kind of Old One tech planted on them in order to harness and use these geomantic energies that would later be used to harness the winds of magic. And these sites do some wacky ass shit. Like, we're talking about things like there's like the Well of Time, where if you go and you approach it and look into it, you can witness like impossible spans of time, and you can see like your past and your future and stuff. Though there are unfortunate notes where the Well of Time, unfortunately, because of the people that are so desperate to get to it, and the Lizardmen guard it so ferociously, everyone that's trying to look into it and to see the future only sees the Lizardmen killing them. That's the only thing they ever see, because the Lizardmen are so horribly ruthless about it. Or there are places like the Ziggurat of Dawn, where the Ziggurat of Dawn is this great burning monolith that's got this big fire at the top, that it is believed by the Lizardmen. We don't know if this is actually true, but the Lizardmen believe that if they take something that has been corrupted by chaos, like an artifact or a demonic weapon or something they just think is corrupted, and they chuck it into this ever-burning magical fire that's spouting out of the top of the ziggurat, it'll cleanse it. Now, is that what it actually does? Is that what its purpose was for? Probably not. Is there a hilarious story about a dark elf who was kind of insane who tried to walk through it like it was the flame of Assuring? Yes, there is. And he dies horribly.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the fun aspects of Old One tech, because the general idea with artifacts of the old ones, particularly when we're looking through the lens of the Lizardmen, is that these are all going to be found down in Lustria, possibly in the Southlands, maybe in a sacred spot and one or two other locations. But the answer to that is categorically no. That's not the case. They are found across the Warhammer world, including in even highly populated areas, often trapped inside ancient stones that have been repurposed for different uses down through the millennia. As we have discussed on previous streams, we've got those waystones, as Sotek was just discussing, that are spread all over the world, and that the elves have repurposed to suck the magic out of the world and throw it back into the warp. But they've also repurposed it to hide their own souls in, to protect them from the rapacious hunger of Slaanesh should they die. And at the core of these are ancient Old One matrices that were used as part of their ancient whatever it was they were doing with their geomantic web, and the big span of magic that they had across the world. And they are across the world, everywhere. You hack open one of those ancient stones, the truly ancient ones, the original ones, not the ones that the elves came along after and added to the then broken geomantic web because chaos had done all manner. And they've dropped in new stones in a whole variety of places, built by magic and very different to the original ones. But there are original ones across the Warhammer world. And some of them will not just be simple, let's say, fulcrum points of the geomantic web. They'll be doing something else. And they can be found anywhere. Anywhere. And all it takes is one new thing to happen and they're activated. And suddenly, this piece of weird Old One tech that could be just as odd as a well of souls or a well of time or a well of whatever is suddenly doing something in a new place, and inevitably also attracting Slann interest from across the world as they sense this thing now activating the geomantic web. You've got a whole story just waiting to pop off. So, yeah. It's cool. And that's all just from what the Lizardmen army list suggests.
Yep. All right. So we're going to get caught up on Super Chats, and then we're going to be heading into something a little different. So Antonio Renza, mounting now Lizardmen, an absolute coincidence. It was all part of the plan. Now mounted the priest on Troglodyte. Hello, dear Italian from? Oh, I'm assuming that's like, I don't know. I don't know what that the last bit's supposed to be. But
hey, Antonio, thanks.
Yeah, I'm glad. Thanks for coming by, and I'm glad you're having a good one. Darius Rose, what's deadlier, 2005 Skull Island or Lustria Jungle in terms of minutes you have to live? Also, is Lustria wildlife spawn or naturally produced? So all the wildlife of Lustria is natural. Yeah. They're completely natural. The only thing that spawns, which we're going to talk about spawning pools in a little while, are Lizardmen. And Lustria is way worse than 2005 Skull Island, though 2005 Skull Island was nightmare inducing. Those bugs were, because Skull Island, it's just that it's creatures that are big, whereas Lustria, even the small things are horrifically deadly. Where it talks about that there are like creatures that are the size of a wasp, like a regular wasp, but their stings are so horrific. Like the thing, the material that these supposedly natural creatures' stingers are made of are so powerful that they can crack dragon scale. Which, like, fuck that. And, you know, there's carnivorous plants and horrible diseases and all sorts of just nasty stuff.
Yeah, that.
Alpha.
Do you want to carry on? Sorry.
Alpha 135. Off topic, but a question about vampires real quick. Nagash learned necromancy from dark elves, and vampires base their elixir off of Nagash's elixir. In turn, dark elves have their own elixirs of immortality, one that is blood-based. Yeah, so I assume you're referring to the blood cauldrons, but it's not a you drink it elixir, it's a you bathe in it thing. That being said, is that a potential tie you could try and introduce? Sure. Yeah, there's something you can mess around with a little bit there.
Yeah, the elixir that was created by Nagash and the eventual elixir that was later on created over in Lamia is a different thing, a very different thing. What the Dark Elves are doing is religiously connected, almost certainly, and involves bathing in blood that has almost certainly also been magically enhanced. Blood, after all, is absolutely suffused with Gyron, which is the magic of life. It's also suffused with other things too. Blood is a natural component of magic in the Warhammer world in a variety of ways because it pulls it in, especially if it's fresh. If it's dead, you're going to get a very different type of magic coming in, and it's not going to be helping you extend your life. In fact, it's going to do the opposite because it's going to be full of shyish instead. So broadly speaking, whilst you can easily say that there are clearly some form of links here that can be made, those links are broadly speaking being made because that's how magic in Warhammer works. It's more the links
blood
are
is a
down
critical
to
component.
magic. Yeah, blood is a component, but that's because blood is special and does stuff in Warhammer. So I would say in this particular instance that whilst there is a relation there, clearly it's not as black and white. It's not as clear cut as simply saying, oh, it's a blood ritual that does the same stuff.
Mornington Crescent. Funnily, the rules for the Blade of Reality were pretty identical to the old rules in 3rd and 4th for demon weapons.
Yes, they were. Yeah, absolutely. And they were all based on, loosely speaking, Stormbringer from Michael Moorcock.
Fire
I forgot
Snake.
to mention it once.
Yeah, everyone took a shot. How terrifying is it to actually fight ghosts? Pretty awful.
Yeah.
Because Warhammer Fantasy is brutal about how ghosts work, which is that if you don't have some form of magic, you're fucked. There is, and by magic I mean anything magical. So like blessings, you know, from a god or an enchanted weapon or something like, or spells or anything like that counts. But if it's very straightforward. If you do not have some sort of magical way to harm them, you cannot hurt them, but they can abso-fucking-lutely hurt you.
And it goes further than that. Ghosts, unlike other creatures like, say, ogres, have fear that is based upon what they are, not upon their size. If we go back to earlier editions of Warhammer, you got a fear stat that was based on your size. Basically, if you were bigger than everyone else, you cause fear. So thus, ogres cause fear, dragons cause fear, and terror in some cases. And that rule got simplified just down to you cause fear or terror. Undead always had that rule hard-coded into them. And that's because undead in Warhammer are terrifying more than just the fact that they're dead. More than just because you can't really hurt them. The magic that empowers them, that impels them, also comes hand in hand with making you afraid. It means that, for example, if you're to meet a ghost on the road that's in a very poor state and just wants to have its bones buried, you're still doing fear tests, even though that ghost might look like just a normal person sitting on the side saying, "Hi, come and give us a hand. My bones need buried." Everyone's going, "Fear test! Crap! It's a ghost! It's a ghost! Fear test!" Because they are inherently scary because of the magic that is wreathed through them. Not just the obvious, the shyish, and shyish often comes, that's the magic of death, one of the winds of magic. Shias is interlaced with a lot of fear-inducing elements, but also the Ulgu that often comes with them. They're insubstantial and wispy, and Ulgu is in many iterations of it the wind of terror, making you very afraid because it can just spin up your worst imaginations. So these winds are flowing through these ghosts, and it causes you to react badly. Everybody universally has to test for fear, even if it's a Casper the Friendly Ghost.
Does silver work on ghosts? Yes. So
Depending on the background.
Depending. Most of the time, a silver weapon gets the magical attack straight. But some writers forget that or say no. So it depends. I'd say most of the time, yes. But yeah.
It's exactly that. It's yes unless it doesn't.
Yeah. Biofoot, what does the prevalence of Old One tech tell us about their intentions and outlook on the future? Are these why they are meant to be or abandoned? Okay, that's a genuinely very good question.
That's a great question.
And this one it's up to you. Because I will guarantee you most of the writers were not thinking about this when they created it. And because the idea, so like if you watched a lot of Lorebeards, you'll know, especially back in the Old One stream, that one of the things we talked about a lot was the Great Plan. And the idea that it seems pretty much guaranteed that the Old Ones intend for the Warhammer world to be destroyed at some point. Now, the way it gets destroyed might not have necessarily been their preferred way it goes down, but it seems like inevitably that was part of the idea. Now, we know, thanks to Age of Sigmar, that Old One technology, because of the way the world's destroyed, it seems to proliferate, and it becomes far more relevant in AOS than it was in Fantasy. So you could argue that the Old Ones placed all of their tech where they did because it's part of essentially a ritual. That all of these ritual components are placed in very careful, proper ways, and there is supposed to be some kind of magical trigger or some trigger event that causes what is later Age of Sigmar to go off. If you view it that way, then I would argue you could view most of Old One tech as it is very, very deliberately placed where it all is.
Agreed wholeheartedly. If we go with the background as it has now been stated to be the case in the old world, and we stick with that, then that is pretty much the case. That is what it's like. And say, for example, down in the southern pole, we've got ourselves a shattered Gate of Chaos. It blew up and all the bits of tech that was there splashed out all over the place, and there's warpstone everywhere, and it's awful. Then the Warhammer world blows, and all these bits of half weird tech spins out, and it's all sort of magically impervious, and the blowing up of the world doesn't blow up the tech. If anything, new worlds might spin around some of these bits of tech that have come out. It's almost like the destruction of the Southern Gate was always planned, and all the individual little bits that are made that comprise the original gate were never really intended just for the gate. They were also intended for what came after the gate, what happened in the Southern Waste, and then later what happens in Age of Sigmar. There is a great plan. There is. It's as simple as that. And that great plan, according to the Lizardmen, is not what occurred. But according to things like the Old World, it kind of is what occurred. And the Lizardmen are wrong. And they were as fooled by the Old Ones as everything else. The Old Ones tricked them. The Old Ones used them effectively as exactly what they were, a slave species, a servitor species, to bring about the outcome that they wanted. And the outcome that they wanted was, loosely speaking, whatever is happening in Age of Sigmar and possibly what comes after Age of Sigmar.
Quintus says, that's why I think the Old Ones are the true villains of the setting. Here's this planet with Dragon's Head all minding its own business, and it got sabotaged, Millennium Forge for it to then die. That's a very reasonable argument.
That is not an unfair reading.
You know, if you're someone that lives in the Warhammer Fantasy world, it is completely reasonable for you to view the Old Ones as horrible. And, you know, we talked about that in the Old One stream, that they have some very strong colonizer-coded aspects to what they do. Now, you could counter-argue and say that, well, if, you know, chaos is inevitable and it's going to devour everything like a horrible cancer unless someone stops it, the Old Ones are doing what must be done to potentially stop it. So, if anything, the structure of the Warhammer world is almost like a universal form of chemo to try and deal with chaos. So
And sadly, we're the good cells that get destroyed along the way.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to look at it, which makes it fun. But great question, Bonfoot. Sean Souls, is there an old one tech for seduction that is not understood and misused for a different use? So,
Probably.
okay, yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah. There's a good example of this, not exactly seduction per se, because seduction has certain implications. But take, for example, there's a magic item called the Lash of Itziodel, or Ishiodel. And the Lash of Itziodel...
Every time.
Yeah, every time. But no, actually, it's a Z, not an X, so it would be Ishlazodel. Yeah, anyway, it's a lash that it allows, when it entangles some kind of creature or strikes a creature, it utterly dominates them. And it's noted that the old ones used it in the primordial world to get control over all of like the big dinosaurs and stuff that we know about. But it gets stolen by dark elves who use it for dark elf shenanigans. But so something that would be used, because what is seduction when you break it down? It is compelling a creature to breed. Now, you know, when we think seduction, we think of sentient creatures, being romantic. But for old ones from a distance, it would be creating old one tech that would say compel their new species they just created to propagate. That is something they would absolutely have done.
100%. So this one here, is there old one tech for seduction? I changed that word seduction because it is so heavy with connotations, and I would replace it with, is there old one tech that enforces others to breed according to the will of the user? And the answer is demonstrably yes. All of the species, as we understand them in the Warhammer world, have been to a degree either manipulated, used, created by, or simply bred by the old ones and their servitor species. So, for example, the elves may have been responsible for doing some of the experiments on early humans. We don't know that's not the case. That's just one example of something that could be done. They absolutely have stuff that did this. Now, do these things still exist? Probably in some form, and probably being misused as something else entirely. The likelihood of it being used to, for example, enforce breeding is low, but the likelihood of it being used to, for example, mind-to-mind contact with an animal and make it do whatever they want is high.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, imagine. So I would, yeah, so the answer is yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hammond, how would the old ones play hide the zucchini? So you jest,
Stark.
But yeah, it's such great writing. But I would say that the old ones are very heavily implied to not really be purely physical beings anymore. They're elevated beyond that. You know, to them, the difference between reality and the ether has been stripped away. So I would suggest they probably didn't breed anymore, which likely is why they are not around. They seem to have been a stagnant species as far as like population is concerned.
Good answer as any.
Because if you're eternal, then what would compel you? You know.
Yeah, quite.
Charles CK, do old one technologies degrade /rust/ lose batteries over time? Yes, they do. And are they so super sci-fi advanced that they functionally can't be stored? So it depends on.
That's also the case.
Yeah, it depends on the specific piece. There are some pieces of old one tech that have become so run down they no longer function. And they require repair. We actually see Lizardmen mess with these kinds of things so the Lizardmen, a lot of the rituals the Lizardmen do are about repairing old one tech.
And
so like and maintaining it. So there's one of my favorite stories that involves the Lizardmen is there's a story that it's from a Slaane's perspective. And it basically talks about how there's the skinks do this ritual every equinox, like spring equinox or something, and it's evolved over hundreds of years into this super ridiculous elaborate ritual where it's like hundreds of skinks and a great feast and all this crazy shit happens. But from the Slaane's perspective, it's every such and such cycles, the skinks are supposed to pick him up, take him outside, and he wakes up briefly to basically do the equivalent of entering in a mental passcode, hit enter to make sure that it cycles through a cleaning process, and he goes back, and then he goes back to whatever he's doing. And there's a moment where the Slann in this essential story becomes, because Slann are usually not paying a terrible amount of attention to their physical surroundings because they're busier with way more important things. But there's this one time the Slann notices what's going on around all of this, basically him entering a passcode for the cleaning cycle on his dishwasher, and he's like, what is going on? And he has no idea what the skinks are doing. But
because
for
they've
him,
gone so ritualistic in what they're doing, it's no longer what it originally was because so much time has passed.
Yeah, and for the Slann, most of the time they just go, you know what, it's not hurting it, and it's not getting in the way, so I'm just not going to worry about it.
I've got things to do, goddammit.
Yeah. But most Lizardman tech does require maintenance. Or Old One tech requires maintenance. Not all, now, there are some pieces, a lot of pieces that pop up that, require, that are just seemingly incredible and always will be. But even when we're talking about like the various items we've spoken about, like there's one called the Cube of Darkness, which it's this elaborate, almost like Tetris cube. And when you input the right command, it opens briefly and just sucks in all the winds of magic and just instantly devours all the magic in the area and snaps shut. And it has to go through a recharge. It can't be used endlessly. You have to wait for it to be able to be used again. Or there are some pieces of Old One tech where the lore explains that it's for a battle, it's one use only, and it explains in the lore blurb that certain things have to be done before it can be used again.
Yeah, and I'll add on top of that as well that there are multiple examples of Old One tech that are, let's be as blunt as we can be, created from metals that are effectively indestructible, created from materials that do not decay. So there are many examples of power sources that need to be recharged and things that need to be done, many of which are magical in nature because they're using the geomantic web or they're putting it under a particular cycle of the celestial bodies at a particular point of time when magic will siphon from the other planets into the Warhammer world. You've got to remember that perfect geometry that all of the solar system is currently in. But not only that, multiple Old One artifacts are also split, broken up. Bits and pieces of them have gone in different places. The number of stupid quests that will be picked up saying, aha, I'm looking for the Old One artifacts across Lustria. If I bind them together,
Luther Harkin,
a god. Luther Harkin, aha, aha, aha. Exactly that. But it's a classic, and that's because each element is effectively indestructible, but the machine itself is not. So the machine itself can be broken up, meaning that even the most powerful, seemingly indestructible machines, artifacts, don't necessarily work because they've been broken or a core component has been taken off, or core components have been taken off, like the 10 examples, because they all know, the Lizardmen, that single component will keep them warm. So they take that component out. Oh, we found one, and they take it out of the device it was actually in, and they pop it up, and suddenly they've got a new sunstone to bathe underneath. Life is good. But that could have been an engine for something else completely different. So it's not just that they go on forever, and it's not just that they're sometimes broken, it's not just that they sometimes require ritual, it's that the machines themselves are often only a small part of a far bigger whole, so they'll often not work because they have been dismantled either by individuals, time, or destruction.
Yeah, and Lithium Blue Them is actually absolutely how the Slann feel a lot of the time. Neil Haystack says, but Lizardmen have writing. No, why don't they leave instructions written down? Seems a huge oversight. So the Lizardmen do not have standard written language. Their language is much more symbolic. Like it communicates ideas. And the problem is you have to remember that there are different levels to their writing, where a lot of the instructions, as you put it, were written by the old ones. And the problem with the old ones is the old ones, they saw reality very differently than everyone else does, because to them they had 1 foot in real space and 1 foot in the ether. So for them, space and time were very different. And when, like, we know when the cataclysm was about to happen, the old ones literally printed a giant titanic list of instructions, which were the sacred plaques, where they wrote down all the things the Lizardmen
Assuming
need to do.
that's even what they were for.
Yeah, assuming that's what they even were for. But they left them a bunch of notes, essentially. And but then the cataclysm happens, where a lot of these notes, because of magic, got destroyed or zapped out of existence or eaten by demons, or the city itself was destroyed and the notes were just lost, or because all the Lizardmen died, some greedy ass humans came in and said, "Oh, that's made out of gold. I'm going to take this back and sell it for money." Or I'm going to melt it down and turn it into something. Or elves took it because it had like magical properties, or they wanted to decipher it. So they had, you could imagine the Lizardmen once had like a master set of instructions, codes, plans, and a lot of the sacred plaques are literally things like, at this date, at this time, please do this thing. And it doesn't explain why. It just says do it. And the Lizardmen go, okay. And it's probably a maintenance procedure. But some asshole from Talea came in with his conquistador buddies from Astalia and took it. So the Lizardmen they don't know, because like, imagine you work in IT and you go in to check your notes and some assholes come in and just take all your sticky notes.
Taking page 3, 12, 42, and 98. So you've just got missing sections. I think one of the things that you're missing there that is definitely key is that time erodes all things. It just does. We are in a state of constant decay. Nurgle is going to win this particular war, so to speak. We are in a state of entropy. And no matter how perfect the original note may have been all those thousands of years later, as time progresses, as the Slan who understand it sleep or are killed, as further repeated generations see this note, the note itself crumbles, it gets replaced by a new copy. Just think of how much stuff we as humans get wrong. That's all written down. Just think how much stuff we as humans claim to understand, but don't. I will give you one example, and it's a controversial one. Religion.
Yeah.
There was only, let's choose the most common one in the West.
We had written language, right? Surely we can't fuck it up.
We're not going to fuck up the teachings of Christ or the teachings of the Old Testament, are we? How many religions are based off of those sets of texts alone? And how many different interpretations do we have of those texts? There are many. Indeed, there's not even agreement as to which text should be or should not be included and what translations are most appropriate to be taught. Religion shows that in just 2,000 years, everything collapses, even if you have a big set of instructions. Now add several thousand more years, more languages, and the core language it's coming from is so complex that none of the species understand it. And you begin to understand just how difficult it is.
Yeah, and keep in mind that there is a literal force, an antagonist that is deliberately trying to sabotage it, where chaos is trying to fuck with it.
Yeah. I just want to pull up a small comment from Castrated as well, because I think it's accurate. Lorebeards 101. Is it this way or is it that way? And the answer is yes. And I think that is accurate.
Yeah, so hopefully that helps. Watchdog 3079. Fans, whenever cool, narratively ambitious ideas are retconned. Writers! Screams in rage. It's hard to be a writer. It's hard.
It is really hard to be a writer, particularly on a long-standing setting like Warhammer, which has got a great deal of lore there. And if you don't have access to those books and you're asked to create something, you're just going to have to create something new. That's how it works. And if you go trying to find all those books and you realize there's like 900 books to read, and only one of those books, none of which are properly codified, has the answer you're looking for, and you have a 2-month deadline, a 3-month deadline, a 5-month deadline, you can't read 900 books. You're just going to create the new thing. And then someone like me comes along, reads it and goes, "Ah, shit. They should have just gone back to that White Dwarf, that random book, that game. This has been covered already, and they've just rewritten
How dare they not read 30 years worth of writing?"
Indeed. So what this needs as an answer, although if we moved on into a different comment.
I'll let you finish.
Yeah, what this needs as an answer isn't per se the writers to know what they're doing. What it needs is a developer who stands over it, who can say, no, you can't do that because it's been done in this book. You can't do that. You need basically lore keepers, Lorebeards, who can sit down and explain when there are new words that have been added contradict books. And then the people who own the IP can say, actually, we want it to contradict because that's an old piece we no longer want. Or they can say, oh, that wasn't the intention. Oops. Let's now modify it so that it matches what's there already.
Yeah, but nobody wants to pay us, so there's that.
Money!
Yeah, so I want to bring this up as well. I agree, but that involves power and politics, and Lizardman society doesn't seem to have this human aspect. It does. There is politics in Lizardman society. The Slann disagree and argue with each other. The different temple cities have different sets of plaques that tell them different things, and they're often trying to fill in gaps. But like, there's a note with how like the plaque of Sotek from the city of Chakwa, the prophecy of Sotek very deliberately said, hey, Skaven are coming at this time. This is going to happen. And the Slann of Chakwa looked at this and went, that's pretty suspicious. That's pretty nasty. And they checked and they realized none of the other temple cities had these plaques. Yeah. And so they deliberately hid these plaques away because they were scared the other Slann would look at it and say, those are erroneous. Those are not part of what the rest of us have. Those are clearly like have been edited by chaos or were a mistake and they must be destroyed. They didn't want to destroy it because they thought it would be important. So they hid it away and didn't think about it because they didn't want the other Slann to read their thoughts about those plaques and say, hey, what are those weird notes you guys have? So there are arguments and politics and misinterpretation. Like the Slann, the biggest example I'll give is Lord Mazdamundi found a really important plaque, which we talked about in the What If Mazdamundi seized control of the Great Plan, which was a super great stream. And Mazdamundi found some plaques, and he basically went on a vacation for months by himself to some really powerful, magically attuned shrine that's bathed in the winds of magic, so he could just think about what he was reading and trying to interpret it. And he is the oldest living Slann there is, and it took him months.
Yeah, and that's just the Slann. Now we move to the
Lizardmen. The Skinks are a whole other mess.
And now there are many who go, yes, but they're almost mindless automatons, aren't they? Well, they may have been once.
Go watch our Artefacts stream.
The rise of Sotek changed everything. The Lizardmen moved from being a servitor species into a fully functioning, God-creating species, unlike what they were before, which meant that they had imagination, passion. They had a whole host of emotions that were clearly coming forth that weren't there before. Take a look at those red-crested skinks. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, check our Tenuan stream, because we dive deep into it over there and explain how the Lizardman species as a whole has changed over time. And they are now as passionate and as emotional as the other species, but just in a very different, cold-blooded way. But they have their own politics, they have their own ways of life, they have their own cultures, and they all, kind of like all cultures, disagree with each other on lots of core fundamental points. The Lizardmen are far from united.
Eidolon 94, idea for a horrifying scenario. There's no one space station still in orbit, and the Skaven space program gets there and loots it.
I don't think that that's even that horrifying. I think that's likely. The Skaven have got a variety of effectively projectors, skitter leaps, things that allow them to move from one place to another. They also have a variety of tech that allows them to literally rocket boost from one place to another. And the idea that they haven't reached the moon, that they haven't reached some sort of orbiting entity at some point is almost ridiculous. They almost certainly have over time.
Yeah,
particularly Moore's Leap.
I would completely argue they've made it to Morslip no problem. It's just that no one's ever come back successfully.
There is downsides for the poor bastard Skaven who go up there because they're not coming back. They're almost certainly dead. But this is the sort of thing that definitely happens because Skaven are properly daft in terms of the things that they are capable of doing. In many respects, they fulfill the same function as the orcs with a K in 40k. There is almost nothing that they will not achieve when they put their minds to it. Their field projection technology in particular is unparalleled when you look at that in comparison to the other species. And in the same way, the Skaven in 40k, in Warhammer, are almost unparalleled when it comes up to coming up with a crazy, stupid plan that might just work.
Yeah, that being said, this type of thing could absolutely happen. Or even if you don't want like Skaven craziness, someone on the ground activating some artifact that turns on a space station that starts to then do stuff. That would be quite spooky.
I know I often do this where I say, I did this in a previous campaign, but I did that in a previous campaign.
It really is on the Lorebeards bingo card at this point.
Yeah, it really should be, because I had done this where there was 20 Old One artifacts that were in orbit around the world, and they were each associated with one of the cardinal zodiac symbols, and had been since the beginning of time. And they were marked on Old One plaques, and they were marked on ancient zodiac symbols, which turned into the modern zodiac that was used in the Old World. And that was based off of effectively 20 Old One AIs that were up in space, and those AIs were the foundation points for many of the gods. And that was something that you can do in Warhammer. You can do that in Warhammer because Warhammer isn't a fantasy game alone. Warhammer is a sci-fi game with fantasy all over it, in the same way that 40k is a sci-fi game with fantasy all over it. So yeah, go wild with this stuff if you fancy doing so. My games sometimes go crazy because why not? That's what the setting allows.
Antonio Renza, the difference between the old world Lizardmen and the Seraphon for the technology of the ancients, what would change or what? So I'm going to TLDR this a little bit. Of that, the Seraphon were basically in many ways upgraded to be far, far more sophisticated. Where during the end times, which this isn't as big of a stretch as it felt at the time, it caught a lot of people off guard, myself included. But like as Age of Sigmar kind of continued to play around with it, you kind of look and go, oh, it actually does make sense.
Makes sense.
Of that, it's basically revealed most of the great temple cities and sites of the old ones are, spoiler, Old One technology, and that a lot of them can be used like Old One tech to become silver starships that fly through into space. And at the time, it was ridiculous, but you look at it now and you go, oh, okay, well, that's not really that much of a stretch. So for Age of Sigmar, they basically went, okay, all of the Lizardmen activated all of their Old One cities and turned them into giant, fucking huge spaceships, because most of the ships were underground.
Have you seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind?
Yeah.
Because you've seen that and the big spaceship at the end, that's what the Lizardmen do to their cities. And this is not a particularly big thing. I remember discussing this with one writer back during the 6th edition Warhammer era, and they're like, yeah, that's totally what the Lizardmen cities are. Well, that was before they did it. This has been a relatively known thing for some time, a discussed thing amongst writers, that the Lizardmen were capable at any point of going, you know what? It's time to leave Warhammer.
Yeah, so the Seraphon are, to sum it up, the Seraphon are much more in tune with much of their Old One tech, and they have a better understanding of it, and they use it much more actively. There's actually a really cool short story from the end of 2nd edition. I think it was the end of 2nd edition. It might have been the end. Yeah, it was the end of 2nd edition. That follows a skink who's inside one of these ships, and you learn that there are sacred spawnings of skinks that have been spawned, and the only thing they do is they know how to use the tech. They're spawned with knowledge of how to use Old One tech, and they do things. But even for them, there are parts of the ship they don't understand. Where they they stay away from it, or it's spooky, or the Slan tell them don't go in there, don't mess with that. So that's kind of the big thing, which honestly, I would be fine with that being something that's backported. The idea that there would be certain spawnings of skinks that don't have battlefield roles, but they just know how the Old One tech works, and that is their focus. They're the fucking IT team for the Lizardmen, I think makes so much sense. It kind of boggles my mind that wasn't already there.
I think to a degree that I quite like the Warhammer version where we've got the degradation of the original plan.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Originally,
I would just have both.
And it degrades over time, and they no longer are doing what they should do. Then we reach towards the end of the world, and they zip themselves out of there in their their silver cities. And the activation of those things activate the old spawning pools, activate new births, activate new knowledge, activate new understanding. The Seraphon, as they stand, I think fit pretty much seamlessly with the Warhammer World version of what the Lizardmen are. It's just you need to take a moment to go, how did one thing become the other? And the answer is simply old one tech, old one artifacts, and new spawnings.
Yeah, especially once again, if you're running with the idea that what happened to the Warhammer world was the point, then it's the world blew up. All right, well, the Great Plan has now entered stage 3. In stage 3, the Lizardmen need all guns on board.
Yeah, and further, if the Lizardmen were fully aware of what stage 2 the plan was, we'd have had absolute rebellion.
Yeah, so they were just left ignorant. It would never have
happened. Yeah, they're left ignorant on purpose. And now they're on the other side. To a degree, they are still completely ignorant. They don't know what the old ones want. They don't know the whole thing that happened that way because of the old ones. So in many respects, it's kind of seamless.
These old ones sound so technologically advanced.
I am regretting making that joke in my signature there.
Do you think all the Warhammer gods are just the first batch of the races from what they originally were from before a la Thunder Warriors that accidentally became gods? That's an interesting theory. The idea that, you could kind of argue that's like the case with the dwarf ancestor gods, where they kind of just feel like the first edition print of the dwarfs to an extent. This isn't a story I think I personally would run with, but I think it's an argument you could make about gods, is that they're essentially like first editions of some of the species.
Although the elven gods in the end time kind of got retconned into something weird that wouldn't fit.
I refuse to acknowledge that.
I recognize you refuse to acknowledge it because I refuse
even
to
Age of Sigmar looks at that.
It.
Age of Sigmar looks at that and goes,
no. Quite right too. I acknowledge it exists, but I don't accept it's a good piece of writing, nor is it, I think, what the elven gods should be. This is something that could be the case, but I don't think it's.
Yeah, I think you'd be very much forcing a square peg into a round hole to make this work.
You're trying to make it work rather than going with the more obvious answers that Warhammer has used almost since the beginning of its writings in the original editions.
Hey man, what would happen if the Cube of Darkness opened around vampires, Tomb Kings, or anything ethereal? Would they just instant die and temporarily? So within the actual rule itself, it just immediately ends all spells and just ends the magic phase. It just ends the magic phase immediately.
Yeah.
Most magical constructs do have the advantage of the magic is bound into them in some fashion. Yeah. And it's kind of like a network. You have to interrupt the network, and the Cube of Darkness doesn't really do that. Now, it would be if you were doing like a POV story, it would probably be unpleasant. But I don't think it would, and it might. I could also see it maybe taking down like really simple constructs like zombies and stuff. But I don't think it would affect higher quality etheric entities, because that's not really how they work.
Yeah, I in fact 100% agree. That's exactly the interpretation I take as well. The artifact demonstrably does nothing on the tabletop to any of those entities. It just does nothing at all.
It would be,
but if you were writing it, or if you were building a story around it, or if you were attempting to construct something interesting for a scenario for the roleplay game, then absolutely you would have all manner of weird outcomes that very much would influence them. And perhaps have someone like Luther Harkon desperately pushing his way trying to get to it. It will be mine! Because it very much suits his craziness. But I think, broadly speaking, the answer is kind of no.
Yeah, I will say, just as a fun note for anyone that ever wants to play around with it, if you go watch, oh man, it's a long ago stream now. Me and Andy did like a introducing basics of Warhammer stream, I think it was.
This was like too long ago. That was about that was within a year ago, I think. We did. Or was it a year and a half?
I think
we did it at the beginning. We did it at the beginning of a year, as I recall.
Yeah, but in any event, one of the things we talked about in it was Andy talked about how there's not just the standard 5 senses which there's not even that anymore, really. But there's more than that. There are some etheric senses. The Cube of Darkness, from a POV perspective, would probably fuck with people that weren't expecting it, because it basically just kills one of your senses for a minute. Which would be very spooky. You know, it'd basically be like someone hitting a button, everyone loses the ability to taste for 5 seconds, which would be extremely alarming, you know? Baron von Bastard, I just got in. Are there any old one relics being used by a non-Lizardman faction? Yes! I'm glad you asked that. There's 3 more super chats, and then we'll talk about some of those. Hammond, do you think the people of End watched RRR? Oh, man, I don't know what that is. I bet it's a popular show.
Movie. It's a movie, and I've watched it. It's stupidly, brilliantly, awesomely daft.
Yeah, so probably. So Armelian Bloodweaver, have you tried turning your city on and off again? Yeah.
Yeah, spot on.
Cameo, I like the idea of the Moon Empress's civilization utilizing Old One tech and the Dragon Emperor feeling envious. Also, do you know if a real-life Stegodon is an extinct elephant relative? Okay, answer the first part. That could be a fun storyline. If you wanted to introduce some conflict between the Empress and the Emperor, of their conflicts over like how he feels about the Moon civilization, how she feels about civilization down here on Malice. Also, did you know? Did you know a real life Stegodon? Yes. I was vaguely aware of that, but that's always a very cool fact. Because you know, Warhammer writers like to steal things.
So we know, without any real doubt, that Mansleib, that's the consistent moon around the Warhammer world, had the old ones on it completely and was dominated by the old ones. So the idea that the Moon Empress's civilization is a component of what was once the old world civilization and is perhaps a descendant of it is, I think, uncontroversial. It's not anything that anyone would go, yeah, that's daft. No, it absolutely matches the story they're telling. So it does seem fair that the Moon Empress, when she comes down to see good old Daddy Dragon, is going to be someone who is conversant with much of what the old ones had available. Now, whether that's a storyline they choose to take or not is entirely down to whatever they decide to do when they actually start drilling into the details of Cathay. Having said that, though, the Moon Empress is, I think, a far more important figure than many like to think of her as, because many of them just go, oh, well, she's the wife who spat out the dragons, isn't she? Yeah, no, she's the Empress, and she brings something very different to the table.
Yeah, I have my own theories that would probably be considered somewhat heretical.
I do enjoy a heretical theory.
I can see, bro. Are there any other stories of other races that have shown up from outside the Warhammer world and then left? Took a look from orbit and said no. So funny. That would make for a very good story, actually. But generally speaking, no. So this is one of those things that if you were heavily diving into a role-play type look at the world, like a detailed look at the history of the world, something like this might come up. Something that you could actually do with an old artifact is there's an artifact called the Sentinels of Shetty, and they are the Lizardmen believe that they are basically this complex set of old one tech that the Lizardmen don't realize really are old one tech that are supposedly scanning the heavens for a signal of some kind. They're a very obvious program. Yeah, they're a very obvious reference of just scanning for aliens. But there was an incident where a skink priest who's in charge of the site heard something. Like it's very flatly stated that he genuinely got some kind of communication from somewhere in space, from outside the Warhammer world. And he went to the Slan and went, oh my God, the old ones are contacting us. And the old ones were like, whoa, shit. And the Slan they went and checked it, and they couldn't really find anything. And they talked among themselves, and they basically went, you either misheard or you're full of shit or something, whatever. No. But we know for a fact something contacted or got picked up. So this would be kind of one of these scenarios where there's something alien happened, but it's not revealed what it was.
Okay, so I'm going to give you one example of where this is sort of almost happened, but then didn't. Originally, the Zotes, were created for Warhammer, and they were pretty much copy pasted from a completely different book by a completely different person. And let's not get into that. But they created a new species for Warhammer. Brian Ansell, in fact, was behind that. And we got ourselves the Zotes. But then 40k came along, and just after, it wasn't Tyranid Attack, it was Advanced Space Crusade 2nd Edition. They went, well, you know what? The Zotes are actually made by the Tyranids. And what the Zotes are is that they are the advanced recon of the Tyranids. And they come in and they act as diplomats. And they basically go, see these Tyranids that are coming? They're great guys. They're good. They're brilliant. And the Zotes were rewritten as this completely different species, but entirely created by the Tyranids. And that had an impact on the Warhammer writings, where people suddenly went, well, wait a minute, does that mean that the Zotes in Warhammer originally came from off-world? That they are, in fact, a forward, advanced species of the Tyranids, and the Tyranids are coming in to the Warhammer world, or alternatively, they've just been picked up from here or something. And that almost got written in, I don't know how many times by how many different writers, where they attempted to conflate the two. But then the Zotes kind of got dropped again for 40k at that point. They were no longer a thing. They kind of come back in again later because Warhammer loves to recycle its old stuff. But the stories change over time. But this would have been a clean example of something that could have been the introduction of a particular species. But that in Warhammer got rewritten as well when we got a completely different version of the Zotes that got added in the 8th edition of Warhammer. So yeah, there's lots of different ways this could be done, but loosely speaking, it's been teased in more than one place in Warhammer.
Oh, cool. We're caught up. So
Way!
Back to examining some artifacts around the other parts of the world. So one thing that has been used by several races, and is actually fairly easy to explain because it's a pretty heavy drop from 40k, is the Pass of the Old Ones. Which, to put it very simply, is just the Elder Webway. That's what it is.
It isn't.
Oh, really? Okay. I probably don't understand what the Webway is.
Yeah, I mean, there's clearly references that make them look similar, but the paths of the old ones, as they're presented inside Warhammer, are a far more scaled back, more localized version that was probably used by the old ones for movement around the Warhammer world. For all that the Webway, if it was doing the same thing, would provide almost instant teleportation. I would actually suggest that the closeness and the close proximity of the Pass of the Old Ones to Warhammer world and the slowness of it suggests it's either very broken and it is like the Webway, or alternatively that it is a completely different construction but with a similar source. If the Webway, for example, was on the Warhammer world, moving from one side of the planet to the other would be instant. And that isn't the case for the various examples of the Old One technologies that are surviving. It is almost certainly the case for what the Old One technologies would have originally been. And they even discussed that, how lots of mini gates that used to be about the Warhammer world. You went in one place and came out of another. What we've got now is this weird degraded version of it where you enter into these paths and they're often like moving through pocket realms, where you might be moving along long corridors or dusty chambers or weird routes as you're moving from one part of the world to the other. And it takes time. You have to actually travel from one place to another inside these paths. So they're not exactly the same as the Elder Webway, for those of you who know your 40k tech. The Elder Webway, for all it's ancient, it's much, and I'd argue, better. What we have left now in the Warhammer world is this weird, broken, fractured system of communication points that seem to have stretched, or alternatively, were always long for very different purposes.
Yeah, so, and for those that don't know, so I'll just explain what they are, because someone might be like, what the fuck is a Webway? The Pass of the Old Ones are basically that there are many different sites around the Warhammer world where you can step into, like Andy kind of said, almost a pocket dimension, where you enter a space that is essentially the Old Ones created tunnels through the ether. Yep. And it allows you to travel significantly faster than you normally would For instance, Gotrek and Felix do this in the book Giant Slayer, where they basically go from Sylvania to Albion in like less than a day, by essentially walking. But it's also shown off in that book that the Paths of the Old Ones are fucked up. They're not safe to travel because many parts of them are broken. There are parts where the ether is essentially leaking in. You can walk out of it or fall out of it, and there's
poor Felix sees some shit there.
Yeah. Felix falls out of it for a bit. It's not a good time. And the demons that are in there are horrible because the demons that we get in most of Warhammer are demons that have come into reality. So reality kind of compresses them in a sense and fits that they have to obey the laws of reality while they're in reality. And that limits their potential. We see like one demon, if memory serves, in Giant Slayer, and that demon is one of the strongest motherfuckers that shows up in the entirety of the Gotrek and Felix saga, where Gotrek gets his shit rocked. It's not until Tekla shows up and pulls Tekla shenanigans, because he's a wizard and he's able to wield ether against it, that they're able to deal with it. And so like going in there is usually a death sentence because you can get lost. So it's not meant for people. The Lizardmen use it sparingly.
Yeah, I'll go slightly further. It's not so much it's not meant for people, it's no longer fit for people.
It's no longer, that's fair.
Because it has broken. It's also pretty much impossible to access outside of abnormal situations. There's the idea that the past old ones were thought legendary before they were discovered by Gotrek and Felix, but you tend to find that whenever something pops up in Gotrek and Felix for the first time, one book of generation later, it's the standard all over the place. Take, for example, a big flying dwarf ship. Now, they all have them. I'm going to bring up this comment because I think there's actually something to it. They're like the service corridors that sit beneath, rich people's houses or theme parks. And you know what? Needle in a haystack. That's a better way of describing it than the others that I've seen, because the point-to-point teleportation through the gates, almost like the realm gates, for example, from Age of Sigmar, those existed and they're almost all gone. The big, huge gates that they use to travel from one star system to another, possibly from one time or galaxy or realm to another, they have also gone. We have nothing of that left. But what we do have left is the service corridors that lie behind it all. And they're slow by comparison. They were probably used for some function back in the day, but they probably weren't used for what they're being used for now, which is transport. The transportation was used by effectively the realm gates, where they move from place to place to place to place to place around the Warhammer world. Instantaneous movement. I want to go from the pawn all the way down to Illustria. I go through the gate and I'm there. But there was also these tunnels that had been bored through the aether, that they were used for something else. Were they used to move magic?
What I would say is, one of the things I think it suggests, I want to say it's in I don't remember if it was the 7th or 8th edition Lizardmen book, was that they talk about the portals that allowed the instant teleportation were like people sized, like an individual can step through. But the paths of the old ones are wide enough that armies march through them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They are different. And each of the paths, when the rare examples where you see them described, are also different because they have internally changed. And we also have other versions of paths, whether it's the world routes, the wheeled way, or whatever, that kick around out there too. But the paths of the old ones are a very real thing that are riddled through the Warhammer world and under normal circumstances can't be accessed. It takes something special to get in there, or a unique event, or a piece of lore that nobody else has. And if you do get in there, you can follow through a path and come out at another fixed location. Sometimes there are splits, so to speak, so you could end up in different locations. So if you're someone who understands how to navigate through them, then you can do so. It's a little bit like the Wheel of Time and its ways as they move around in there, if you've seen the Wheel of Time or if you know those novels. They're a little bit like that, but they're a little bit broken, just like the ways in that as well. But as to what their original purpose was, it seems likely it wasn't for transportation. After all, the big gates, some of them like miles wide that could take enormous ships passing through whole cities, could pass through them. That was used for point-to-point teleportation. Lots of tiny little gates where individuals could move through. Effectively little stargates where you just pop through point to point. And because the distance is so short as far as the ether is concerned, it's instant, like the webway over in Warhammer 40k. But these paths are quite different. These paths are weird, interconnecting tubes that move through the aether and are no longer safe for one reason or another.
Yep. All right. We're going to get caught up with super chats. Then we're going to dive into the last two categories, which are controversial but fun.
Controversial fun one.
Kremgelto. I was one, but now I'm many. We all agree on one thing. Yeah, you were one, but then you got obliterated out of existence, which is why you're many, because you're many little specks of dust on the motes of the wind. The Talenteer. This is my first time catching a stream. You both rock, but have unfortunately inspired my self-indulgent, self-insert fan fiction.
Look, there is nothing wrong with self-indulgence.
What is roleplay if not that?
Just go wild, man.
That is a very funny way to describe roleplay. That's basically what it is. Hammond, do the Sentinels of Shetty, that's not how they're spelled, but yes, it's an X instead of the X, SH, have the second have a dad that almost died from choking on an Egyptian Nehekaran date reference to
War Pharaoh.
I
haven't played, sadly, Total War Pharaoh, so
I know the cutscene you're talking about, but I don't know what the Sentinels of Shetty have to do with that. Oh, Shetty the Second. Oh, okay. As in, like, that's a person's name. I see. I see. Okay,
that makes so much more sense. You got there in the end.
There you go. Searing Doom the coat. Find me lizard trinkets. You don't need a Searing Doom.
Yeah, I just got to say it one more time. I fucking hated Searing Doom in 4th edition because I had the 72-inch range, which was basically the length of a 6-foot table, which was
so long.
Which was your standard biggest
wide,
table.
Okay.
And I would often be playing giant games of Warhammer on like 10-foot tables or whatever, and that was the fucking sniping spell that you get. I'm miles away. Little wizard gallops out. Look at me, little go wizard. Zap! Oh, fucking hated it. Unless I was using it. Great spell.
What music does Slanesh prefer? Eldar Wub Wub. Eldar Wub Wub. Yes, I'm sure Slanesh does. Eldar Wub Wub. Palsky, we'll go with that. Is it explained anywhere why there are no attacks from the Southern Chaos Gate? Slon related with their presence in the Southwest. So, some writers have tackled this. This is actually tackled in the Lustria book. So, the first explanation that's given is that the distance between the Southern Chaos Wastes and the rest of the world is pretty long, and it's a horrible, tempestuous, nasty ocean that is very difficult to get across. But things do get across it. And the second thing is that the Lizardmen and the High Elves generally handle it. Like all those towers the elves have along the south of the world is to guard against the Southern Chaos Wastes, as well as maintain their ocean-wide network. And the Lizardmen focus a lot of effort on strengthening something that's called the Great Warding, which tries to keep the Southern Chaos Waste nastiness there and tries to keep the Northern Chaos Waste nastiness there and makes it difficult for things to get out.
They're different is the answer. And we've got pretty much demonstrable proof they're different. Now, most writers are unaware that they're different because they didn't used to be. If they're older writers, they're like, no, they're not. They're just the same thing, but in two places. Or if they're writers from around about the 5th edition onwards, they often think there is no Southern Chaos Gate because they forgot about it for a while. And then they bring it back again. But they're different. And why are they different? Because in the north, we got Morrslieb. And Morrslieb was spat out, and all of that warpstone went up. And we ended up with this big shattered tear in reality. In the southern pole, Morrslieb went down, and all of the wastes in the south are riddled through with warpstone. It's a different place, and they don't have all of the chaos tribes sitting around it. The enormous swarms of humans all the way around, because That place is fucked, man. It's really, really bad down there. There's beastmen and horrible gigantic creatures and shard dragons and all sorts of horrors.
Yeah, the warpfire dragons are nasty. They're real fucking scary.
Warpfire dragons are bad. Yeah, so the stuff down at the Southern Pole is proper bonkers and bad, but also broken. The stuff down there is very different to the stuff in the north. The stuff in the north is, I would argue, almost more controlled, because that warpstone engine got kicked out. It's an artifact of the old ones. It's almost certainly what was powering the gate in the north. What was powering the gate in the south blew up. And that was bad, man. Yeah, and the southern gate's just different. So we can have two different things, and they have two different solutions. The solution in the south is they're warding the place up to try and ensure that all of the horrendous taint down there doesn't get out. Where in the north, they've got a different problem because it attracts, like flies to shit, all of the people who are desperate to get the Chaos God's attention. There are uncounted hordes up there, all of whom are worshipping the Dark Gods and then come swarming down each time that the Chaos Gates wax in power. Where the Chaos Gate to the site, when it waxes, whatever comes from there tends to be big, bad, and horrific.
Yeah, the southern Chaos Waste, like Andy said, is much more heavily, like it's the highest amount of warpstone in the world. The most warpstone in the world is Southern Chaos Waste, which is good because it's such a bitch to get to. That being said, if there's ever a faction or a book that will explore it, interestingly, it'll probably be Koresh, because Koresh, there's a part of the Southern Chaos Waste that expands upwards. And there's this little strait called the Gates of Calith, which is a very tiny amount of ocean between the Southern Chaos Waste and the southern tip of Koresh. And there's some horribly busy high elf fortress right there that have a terrible job. But I have to imagine that's like the penal colony you get sent to if you really fucked up. You get to go be on garrison there. But
that's a place that's almost certainly responsible for an enormous chunk of wards that are in place down there to try and stop the worst of what's down there coming up.
Yep. Elementary exposure. Do any of non-corrupted Truthsayers roam the world Gandalf style? Yeah. Yes. Fighting chaos, or do they all hang out in Albion drinking whiskeys of the world? No. There are Truthsayers all over the place. Yeah.
Oh, the non-corrupted ones. Yes, they do wander around the world, and they were told to be the conclusion to the campaign was effectively that the corrupted ones were out in the world doing corrupted shit, but they've been kicked out of Albion because they lost the campaign. And the ones who won the campaign still hold Albion, but there's so many other invading forces now that they are very much on the back foot because it was a marginal victory. But it also meant that they had been spread out from there, and they were spreading their messages, which was effectively the druidic message, across the old world. Did they use that again? No, they did not.
Yeah, there's also there's a particularly famous Dog of War unit that's literally just a Truthsayer from Albion with two giants that follow him around.
Yeah. What's his name again? Hengus? Hengus,
yeah,
the Truthsayer? It's Hengus and his dragons, I think, as I recall.
They're giants, but yes. 10,000 ants. Just getting in. Don't know if this has already been answered, but is all old one tech inherently magical, or are some pieces genuine sci-fi high tech? So the old ones, there's a very key sentence about the old ones, which is that to the old ones, there is no difference between technology and magic. There's no line. They are so advanced that is completely blurred. It's just energy.
Agreed. Yeah. So you could argue that yes, they are all inherently magical because that's how they work. It's a little bit like saying, is there any technology that doesn't use electricity that we use in the modern world? Well, of course, there's lots of simple things that don't use electricity, but electricity is a core component of how we build most of our machines these days. And generating power for them is generally based off the idea of the various electric currents and how we manipulate them. Somewhat similarly, the magic part is their electricity. That's how they power everything. It's all working through magic. So the answer is inherently, kinda, but there's lots of examples of stuff that might not necessarily just use magic.
Callantir, there are 3 canon examples of portals to paths under Dwarfen Karoks. Is it secretly even more common? So this is something that, I'm trying to remember the book that introduced it. There's an I don't remember exactly which book introduced it, but there was a book that introduced that there was a path that was kind of vaguely discovered that caused a dwarf to functionally kind of teleport from the World's Edge Mountains to Lustria. And you could look at that and go, oh, the mine of the bearded skulls in Lustria kind of makes sense because of that, or whatever. And this really got heavily picked up by the writers of Cubicle 7, who played around with it in the Lustria book and have further played around with it in the newer dwarf books as well. Which the idea that the absolute depths of the dwarf Carax might accidentally tap into something like the Pass of the Old Ones or some other portal that accidentally kicks them off somewhere else is not that far-fetched at all in the slightest. Any number of Carax are going to be built over important sites that the dwarves might not realize is an important site.
I agreed completely. The old Carax were, the oldest Carax in particular, were a part of the existing network of the old ones. So the idea that there is pathways connecting to them is not only not controversial, it's inevitable. They are going to be there. Now, again, I think it's fair to note that these pathways are unlikely to be old one pathways used for teleportation from one place to the next. They were probably for something else, possibly to ensure that some geomantic magic could pass through from one side to the other, like a cable. Imagine it like a cable, and people could go in there to maintain that cable because it's a relatively wide space. We don't know what they were originally used for, but because we know that there was instantaneous movement in a variety of other ways, we know they probably weren't used for movement. So this is, yes. Are they common? No, because many of the holds were founded long after the old ones. So common, I don't think would be quite correct, but I will say that exits and entrances to the past of the old ones are probably much more common than people realize. It's just they're hidden, broken, no one can access them, no one knows how to access them. There might be a path, say, for example, between Altdorf and Lizardmen. I know that's ridiculous, but Altdorf is a nexus point of magic, which means it's a nexus point of all of the paths of magic that cross the Warhammer world, which means that the likelihood that there's gates there are super, super high. But have they been found and are they used? The answer is no. They just haven't.
Yeah, especially because that gate might only be operational at a certain time of year, or when the winds of magic are blowing particularly strong or something.
Yeah, and these aren't gates that are generally just sort of they open and they shut, or that's just a door that you can open up. Most of them require something to occur before you can enter them. It's a little bit like a real door. It's got a handle on it. You have to pull and open, but it's not a handle. It's a mystic thing that has to occur, or a thing that has to be slotted in, or something, which means that they are never, ever encountered. I would say, though, that it's quite likely that the vast majority of them are not indestructible, because most old one tech appears not to be, but almost certainly very, very, very tough in some fashion or another, meaning that most of them are probably still there.
So this is a perfect segue to one of the two semi-heretical, but in my opinion, completely incontrovertible discussions that we're going to have, which is that Old One tech. There is actually a very, very common piece of Old One tech that can be found. I don't know about very common, but compared to the other Old One tech we've been discussing, is very, very common, which is the metal known as Gromrill.
Gromrill.
The Gromrill of the dwarfs is literally just pieces of Old One tech that got... So when the Old One tech blew up way back and showered across the world, a lot of pieces of Old One technology were destroyed in terrible cataclysmic bombardments and explosions, as there was feedback, and it wasn't just the big polar gates. There were a lot of destruction on the planet itself as that shockwave rippled around the world. And a lot of these pieces blew up into lots of little shards or rained down from the heavens and got embedded deep within the earth in all sorts of different places. And this would later be mined up by the dwarfs, who fortunately had an ancestor god who knew how to work it, because he was taught how to work it by some mysterious force within the glittering realms.
Yeah, totally. Gromrel is star metal, as it's often referred to, because it is often associated with great impact sites where the Gromrel has embedded itself in the ground and they've managed to get it out. Is almost certainly Old One in origin. It's probably what much of their nigh-on indestructible machines were made out of. When they get a big vein of it, it's probably just a long strut from an ancient machine that may once have been there, and they work their way down that vein, pulling that metal out. Note that there is pretty much no Gromrel in, say, for example, Ulthuan, and there's a reason for that. Ulthuan was shielded, completely shielded by the gods during the first explosions that happened across the Warhammer world. When it went boom, Ulthuan was protected, as were large chunks of the Lizardmen areas and similar. So the places that weren't protected, the high mountains, the open plains where the humans were, are where most of the Gromrel landed, the mountains in particular, because they weren't protected. Boom, they come in, and the dwarves then mine them out later. And so important is this metal that the elves ended up having to try and create their own version of it. LAWhammer is a fine example of that.
Yeah, so fun fact, LAWhammer, don't be deceived by the fact that it's called sky metal. It's called that because it's as light as the sky, not because it's from the sky. LAWhammer, most of it comes from a very particular part of Calador, but it's due to like the unique environment.
Yeah,
but it's not all one
super light and super strong. It's a very different type of metal to Gromrel, which is nigh-on indestructible when used properly, and is capable of taking on board the most powerful of ancient runes in a way that other metals simply can't. They can take the master runes, and most metals can't take master runes. The vast majority of master runes require something very special. Usually Gromrel, not all of them, because some of them can be properly wended into, for example, tapestries, but even them are being treated in some fashion or another. But yes, Gromrel is a special wet metal, inherently magical in what it's capable of doing, and yeah, almost certainly Old One.
Yeah, almost like it was a metal that was specifically designed by a super advanced race to take magic as if it were instructions, like someone creating a circuit board for a computer.
100%. I think it's quite, if you want to just be nice and simple about it, and a sort of almost modern day sci-fi equivalent, it is a programmable metal. And it's a strong, almost indestructible programmable metal that has landed in the Warhammer world in a variety of places. That is not what it originally was when it was very first written. It was just a poor, crap version of Mithril from Lord of the Rings that they gave to the dwarves. That's all it was. And then they conflated it with meteoric iron, and they said, oh, that's where they got their steel from. It was from meteoric iron, and then over time, it has become something else, and it's almost certainly the metal of the Old Ones.
Yeah, and what I'll also note to kind of come back to Callantier Super Chat real quick is that if you think about it as well, the dwarves tend to first find like a valuable resource, like a Gromrel vein, and then they make a mine, and then the vine eventually grows into a Karak as they dig deeper, deeper, deeper. The idea that they might accidentally stumble across a part of this Gromrel vein that's still a functioning machine, and that it does something, could absolutely happen.
And I think that is a very good way of taking, for example, a relatively new Karak and tying it into those ancient pathways, because they are often working around ancient metal seams that they're trying to get access to. Dwarves do love chasing down their Gromrel, and that gives you a perfect way of perhaps drilling a little bit too deep and accidentally opening a gateway into something far, far, far worse. And if you really want to go a little bit crazy, remember, the Old Ones were not just on the Warhammer world. They were on Mansleep, they were on Vedra, they were on Charon, the other planets elsewhere. It's very likely if you were to pop up to Vedra, which is the next planet along from the good old Warhammer world, it's probably covered in ancient styles of lizardmen and various other species up there, because the Old Ones were there. So you could end up being on a completely different planet going through this gate, thinking that you are perhaps in Lustria, which is also kind of fun.
Yep. So that takes us to that takes us to the next controversial piece, which I feel very strongly about, but not everyone does.
Ooh.
Though I would argue the end times once again makes this incontrovertible, which is that the flame of Ulrich is being shot out of something. And it is revealed in the end times, after being hinted at for a long time, that in the deepest, darkest depths beneath Middenheim is a titanic piece of Old One technology that a part of it either broke or got messed with and has just been gouting horrific amounts of magic out until Archaon finally digs it up in the end times. And basically, for those unaware, its intent was not to destroy the planet. Archaon has a bunch of guys basically perform this huge, ridiculous, corrupting ritual that corrupts it to the point that when it's activated, it blows up just like the other two gates did, and it creates a third titanic chaos gate that basically causes a chain reaction that devours the planet.
Yeah. This isn't controversial at all. I think either. You know,
some people might feel it is, but I don't think it is.
No, I don't think it is either. Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that whenever something controversial comes up in Lorebeards, we tend to just go, it's not controversial at all. That's what it is. The Flame of Ulrich. If you don't know about the Flame of Ulrich, it was said to have been put in place by Ulrich, the god of winter, war, and wolves of the Empire, particularly tied to one of the tribes of Sigmar. And it was, depending on the story you believed, cut a long story short, put in place by a big fist strike, or he flattened off the top, hit it with his axe in some stories as well. He basically caused a flame to spurt up, often associated with some of the arguments he had with his mate Tal, either his brother or his dad, depending on which writer was mangling it that day. We've got ourselves an eternally burning silver cold flame that through the course of the Middenheim book, which I helped plan, I very strongly associated that through with Gur, which is known for also being a very cold wind. So that's one of the winds of magic, the amber wind of magic, but purposefully didn't make it solely associated with that, because if it was, it would have been an orange wind, an orange flame that we got bursting out of that. There's more going on here, but Gur is strongly embedded into whatever is down there, and the flame definitely comes from down below, and as we find out in the end times, it is associated directly with an ancient piece of Old One tech. And this is not, I think, it's not only not a controversial take, it's what it says. That's what it is. And very possibly Azurin's flame is similarly based on something like that. Now, if you don't know Azurin's flame, over in Ulthuan, there's another eternally burning flame, which is either, depending on which book you read, inside the pyramid, in the base of it, or on top of the pyramid. And conflicting stories will place it either inside or on top. But the rune of Azurin makes it quite clear it's on the inside. But it does depend on which story you want to go with. And this flame burns eternally, as the flame over in Middenheim does, but is instead a bright red flame, obviously associated, perhaps, if you want, with winds, with something more like, or possibly, that's classic fire, or phoenixes, exactly, and their rebirth. And it probably is as well associated with Old One tech. Ulthuan, the entirety of it is associated with Old One tech. It was built by the Old Ones for the elves.
Yeah, it's like, how do you think it floats, Dinguses?
Yeah, indeed. Why hasn't it sunk down all the way? Because it's Old One tech. This flame is probably still in its original place and its original format. There is the possibility, however, that the flame that's over in Middenheim, the myth of it is that flame was released by a god. So that myth could very well be true, in that this was a capped place and it got broken into, and that flame burst out at a later date. But the Flame of Azurin appears to be the original state of affairs with the original pyramid, which is the Shrine of Azurin in place. Note the pyramid.
Yeah,
It's a
structure.
stepped pyramid.
A
that
structure
is
another race likes very much.
It's exactly the same as a Lizardmen pyramid, except this is one that is associated directly with Azurin, the divine god emperor of all, not just elves, but of all the heavens. And the divine god emperor sat there upon the top of his throne, or alternatively inside it on his throne, depending on which story you read, and ruled all of the gods from here. And when it was vacated later, when the gods disappeared, it is all still there. All the original structures there. The Phoenix Guard now protect this place silently, never talking, because of what they've seen and because of what they know. And that is kind of cool. And is that an Old One artifact? Almost certainly.
Yep. So fun stuff there. All right. Getting caught up on some super chats and stuff. Bobfoot, so the Sentinels of Shetty are a WoW signal event. Yeah. that is the way you look at it.
I mean, yeah.
Krogato, we will put ourselves back together. No, you won't. You will be regulated to the shadows of time and never released. Baron Valbasser, when it comes to the... Oh, I'm glad you brought up the Hand of the Gods. When it comes to the Hand of the Gods, how does it compare to legendary weapons like the Sword of Cain, Slayer of Kings, Grim Axis? So the Hand of the Gods is another one of those cases where I genuinely believe it was not intended as a weapon.
I agree.
The Hand of the Gods, for those that don't know, is the prosthetic arm that Krokkar has instead of his left arm. Because, fun fact, we didn't actually get this revealed until an artist book for Total War Warhammer 2 revealed that Krokkar did in fact have one of his arms ripped off during the Cataclysm when he was fighting against some stupid, god-awful number of demons. He survives the war, just kicking ass until it's over. And as Mazda Mundi appoints him as kind of like the supreme commander of Lustria's armies, and as part of that, gives him this prosthetic. And the prosthetic is obscenely scary. It is a very, very powerful piece of technology that Krokkar is able, even though he can't use magic, Saurus cannot use magic at all, Krokkar is able to channel magic through it and fire off beams of light, which, depending on the... funny enough, it actually changes based on which author wrote Krokkar of how exactly it works. Because in the original version, Krokkar will hold out his hand like he's the fucking Emperor Palpatine, and beams of light would shoot out of each of his fingertips and like burn the shit out of people. And then in 7th edition, those authors retconned it to instead he forms like a sun in the palm of his hand and shoots that at you. Which is just kind of funny. But in the original version, it was actually quite scary because it wasn't a bounce spell. In the original version, he just shot energy beams at you and there was fuck all you could do about it. And it hurt. It hurt really bad. In 7th edition, they kind of reeled it in a little bit and made it where he basically cast the base
4 hits, as I recall.
Yeah, it was the basic spell from the Lore of Light. So it did like bonus damage against demons and stuff. But you know, even then, the fact that he's like, even then, the idea that he's shooting pure hiss at you to just fuck you up is pretty spooky, especially from a Saurus. Now, the End Times basically took the Hand of the Gods and tied it into the storyline of what the Seraphon would become, which is that when the End Times goes off, something about the End Times causes the Hand of the Gods to unveil its true function, which is that it had a secondary function, or you could argue its primary one. And its primary function is revealed that it causes Krokkar to ascend into something else. Because he quite literally gets hit with one of the most over-the-top super attacks from a Vermin Lord Corruptor. And not just any Vermin Lord Corruptor, fucking Vermilanx, who is like one of the most... He's like the top 3 most powerful Vermin Lords in existence. And he hits Krokkar with like this obscenely over-the-top attack that it says, oh yeah, when he unleashes this attack, it causes all of the Temple Guard within like a 50-foot radius around Krokkar to instantly shrivel, die, and dissolve into mulch. Krokkar falls down to one knee, and the arm starts to glow, and he just gets back up and starts just kicking ass again, immediately.
Like a good Krokkar.
Like a good Krokkar. But it turns him kind of into a demigod. And it's revealed through Age of Sigmar later that basically he was becoming infused with the Wind of Light to the extent that he was no longer a simple Lizardman. He was a Seraphon, the first Seraphon. So the Hand of the Gods, I don't think it's a weapon. I think is quite literally it's an upgrade component.
Yeah,
it's something that takes the initial biological design of the Lizardmen and takes them to their next step on the evolutionary process that the old ones planned for them. So does it compare to legendary weapons? No, because it's not a weapon, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
No, the shooting lasers is quite scary.
It's damn handy, but it's almost like that's the exhaust.
I agree.
It's a core component of what it is and what it's doing and the benefits that it provides, but ultimately its true purpose is Lizardman upgrade.
Yeah.
Agreed completely. Yes.
Katsuki, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's almost certainly insanely dangerous, and it's almost certainly held by different clans in different places. And going there to mine the readily available warpstone is a little bit like signing your own death warrant. And many Skaven go, and most do not come back.
Yeah, this is full on canonical. Like, this isn't even like you think. Like, it is a thing, but. Like Andy said, the biggest problem they have is that because it's there's so much and it's so obvious and exposed, all the things that are there like Warpstone. So it's a very competitive environment. Yeah. Whereas like normally the Skaven, when they go after Warpstone, they're not competing against as much because Warpstone's deadly to most things in like the old world, for instance. Whereas in the Southern Chaos Waste, you know, that Warpfire Dragon says this is his territory. You try and steal from his horde. Good fucking luck. The count here. Felix comments that the old one glyphs lining the paths are very similar to dwarf runes. It feels like the dwarfs are technicians maintaining them. Drumroll.
Yeah, I think that was most certainly a suggestion that you could take from what Bill King was writing there.
Yep. Which is very consistent with the later stuff that we have.
And it absolutely also works for the idea that these are basically service maintenance tunnels that are underneath the network of the geomantic web. And this is where you go to effectively fix the broken bits underneath the geomantic web that are channeling everything around. It seems more likely that they are service tunnels than they are transport tunnels.
I agree. Morton Crest, given that the innately anti-etheric nature of a lot of old one tech, what might happen if the Dawizar tried to use a piece of crafting one of their war machines? Well, so the Dawizar have an advantage, which is that they have Hashut, and Hashut knows things. He knows a lot of things. So if there's any entity that I think would realistically know how to corrupt old one tech very reliably, it's probably Hashut. And the results would probably be really awful.
And almost certainly bound with a demon as well. So yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah. Ricky Chapman, we encountered the past of the old ones in our Chaos Wolfrip campaign. 160 Chaos Warriors and 300 Tong entered them. Only 6 people came out alive.
Yeah.
That sounds about right.
In my version of one of my end times, the past of the old ones were used to invade Altdorf by a Chaos army, which was super fun. That was bad, man. But that was long before the real end times happened. My end times was bad. Bad in that game, at least.
Surveyor, before the War of the Beard / Vengeance, the dwarves apply runes to Ithamar, elves enchant Gromro. Could they probably
in both cases? I don't see any reason why they wouldn't.
I mean, dwarves can put runes on things like steel and banners, so they can do Ithamar.
Yeah, runes can go on almost anything. Master runes tend to require something special to go on to, but not always. There's ways around it, particularly for certain types of master rune, especially those that are stitched, for example, because some runes are stitched. It's special stuff, but Ithamar would probably take some, but you get that feeling that just because all of the writing between elves and dwarves generally always says something along the lines of, yeah, we tried, but it failed. Yeah, we tried, but it failed. Their stuff's just broken in comparison to ours. You probably find it might shatter the Ithamar, perhaps more brittle, for example, than Gromril when it takes to taking runes, but it takes elven runes very well indeed, because elves have got their own runic magic. Most of their weapons are covered in elven runes that do a whole bunch of stuff that no one ever bothers writing rules for, but they absolutely exist. They
Man, the
They're
elven
as extensive as what the dwarves have. It's just a very different style of outcome.
Yeah, elven runes, elven enchanting, elven smithing, elven singing, and elven language are horribly unexplored topics for how important they are.
They are enormously important. I mean, heck, this is something I argued all the way back when they did Realms of Sorcery for 2nd edition Warhammer. Humans do runes. The number of enchanted items that come out of the colleges of magic is significant, and they have their own runic way of doing it. They're shit in comparison to the dwarf ones, significantly less reliable, but they still do them. There's many a runic weapon that a bright wizard will carry that bursts into flame, created by the colleges, not by dwarfs, not by elves, but by humans. These are not entirely species unique. They are in the battle game, even though the blurb for a magic item may say, this weapon created by the college, covered in runes, not made by dwarves, does this. They exist in the battle game, but they don't have the runic system that the dwarfs have. The same is the case for the elves. And in the roleplay game, they shouldn't just have rules. They should have extensive rules. I argued it back then. I lost because the book was finished. Damn it. It was going to be a thing, for example, in the Colleges of Magic book that I had already planned. There was going to be about 60 pages on artifact creation, which would include building runes into your items within the Colleges of Magic. And the elves should absolutely have the same.
Yep. Hammond, does Marathi like the Hand of the Gods? I'm sure she would. Callantir, could O1 Tech make a half-human / That's very rude. That's very rude. You're going to get some very angry French letters about that. Hammond, so essentially Palpatine Krokar and Goku Krokar. If you want to look at it that way, you can.
Yeah, Hammond, you're spot on, actually.
Yeah, I will say that I do find the imagery of him like firing a miniature sun at people to be much more evocative than him shooting beams out of each of his fingers. But it's also probably easier to draw.
100%.
But in any event, I think that's all the major beats when it comes to the. Now, obviously, there are a lot of like small components of O1 Tech that we didn't really address. Like, once again, any and all of the important sites on the geomantic web or the structure that makes up the vortex have some piece of O1 Tech hidden around them or beneath them. Many of the great sites where the elves built their cities, or humans built their cities, or dwarves built their cities, have O1 Tech hiding somewhere around there, but it's usually very deep beneath the earth, or it's been destroyed so badly that the stuff that built over it is just completely indistinguishable from it. So could you find an O1 piece of O1 Tech anywhere in the world? Absolutely. But the main big ones are the ones we'll discuss, where, you know, the vast majority of it that you could find easily will be in Lustria, the Southlands, or very deep beneath the earth.
All seems fair to me.
And most of it, you shouldn't fuck with it, because even if it's not intended to kill you, it can very easily do so by complete accident. Just like if you were...
I wonder what this does. Planet goes out of orbit.
Yeah, just like just like if someone sets you loose in a room that has a complex power grid and you touch something because you don't realize what it does, it might just electrocute you.
Yeah, very much so.
So if you see O1 Tech, don't touch it. Unless you're a dumbass PC who goes, well, this could be the most powerful magical item in the game, in which case it might be. Maybe. Jack Ruby, don't the Amazons have laser pistols? Yeah, we talked about the Amazons earlier. So yeah, and different authors, there is a debate amongst the writers that have tackled them and within the community about how sci-fi the Amazon should be, whether they should just have flat out like 40k-ish weapons, or they should be more fantasy coded. Like if you go read the White Dwarf article about them from that came out around the Lustria campaign-ish time. So this was like the early 2000s. Yeah, they are, instead of having guns, they're noted as having staffs that fire beams of light that just kill people. So it's like, oh, well, they're more like
Yeah.
a sun's stave as opposed to
100% lifted from Michael Moorcock.
Yeah. So
because of course it was. So yeah, don't worry about being late to that one, Jack. It's an important question because it is an artifact of the old one. I'll cover it again when I do my quick brief at the end, just to make sure that we've mentioned it one more time.
Gunza, screw it. Haven't you both lasers and suns? Well, maybe for Krokar, who knows? Maybe he's got a switch that we've never seen him use.
I would 100% do that if I was writing it for fantasy roleplay. I would have it having more than one capability.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that's actually in so Age of Sigmar, which of course this actually makes sense. That those Hand of the Gods are actually far more common because the Lizardmen are able to replicate them now. And they're known as Sunbolt gauntlets, and they fire in different methods, where some of them do fire the suns and some of them fire the claw lasers. And they hurt if you roll good. If you don't roll good, they're kind of meh.
Pish.
But
yeah.
the 6th edition version will always be the best, because if I remember, I think that was the one where it did additional hits if you had more ranks, because it would like sear through. So if it was like a unit of Skaven, Krokar would just be like, fuck you, just delete the unit, which was great.
All right, shall we bring it to an end since we just passed the hour?
It is.
I'll give a very quick summary then, because this one's really easy to summarize. Much like we said right at the very beginning, artifacts of the old ones fall into two categories. One is the real artifacts of the old ones. That's what we've been discussing for the last 2.5, almost 3 hours. And these are the remnants of a previous high technology society where magic and science were all mangled together into one. And whether it's the metal, and we suggest it's the Gromril that they find, or the various artifacts, the gold, weird, magical things that are prevalent throughout the many cities of the Lizardmen, or possibly even the elves. Whatever these things are, they're often very powerful, and they're often misused in a variety of different ways. Check the previous stream if you want to see exactly how they're misused. But there is a second faction of Old One artifact which is worth mentioning, even though we didn't really cover it with any great detail today. And that is effectively that once in this high civilization that came before, this high-tech world has left artifacts behind that are effectively 40k items. And they have, in multiple games, in multiple examples, in multiple editions, been copy-pasted over from 40k and just used as Warhammer artifacts, equivalents of power fists, equivalents of las pistols, equivalent of plasma pistols, et al. This was very common in early editions of Warhammer, where 40k and Warhammer tended to run together quite closely. But in later editions, you tend to find that those games have moved apart. So the Warhammer equivalents of what would have once have been a las pistol wielded by an Amazon turns instead into something that looks like an arcane Warhammer artifact, that instead of being a simple pistol becomes a staff that shoots laser lights or magic from its end and burns through things. And that's kind of cool. But it should be mentioned, those things definitely exist, not just in terms of the background as a whole. Every single version of the Amazons have got some sort of tech attached to them, whether it's more times one, where you quite literally kind of got 40k weapons, whether it was the old editions of Warhammer where you did get 40k weapons, not quite literally possibly looked like they were 40k weapons, whether it's the old Realms of Chaos where you literally got 40k weapons coming in through the gates of Chaos. Chaos warriors would often come in with chainswords and similar, and they were considered to be artifacts of the old ones in general. But they are very much nowadays in the minority. The true artifacts of the old ones are those crazy artifacts that the Lizardmen wheeled out and almost certainly used wrong. Those same artifacts that come the end of the world will save the species as it spirits itself away in silver ships to move on towards the Age of Sigmar, where all of those artifacts, all the new spawning pools that create there, and all of the Hands of the Gods that they have, create a new version of the Lizardmen in the next world, or worlds to come.
I've got to talk about spawning pools.
Spawning pools, yeah, that's a good point. And very old as well. Their first spawning pools were in Warhammer First Edition. The concept of a spawning pool is not a new one. Spawning pools were first mentioned all the way back in the first edition of Warhammer.
Well, we'll have to talk about those another time. I'll just TLDR it of they spawn lizardmen like a genetic they're little tadpoles, these crazy mechanical components go off, and some of the tadpoles grow into full-size lizardmen, and they come out fully grown. Lizardmen are kind of, it's sad, they don't have cute, adorable adolescent or child faces. They just pop out fully grown, which is a bummer. If you like cute things. All right. Get
last
the last
couple of comments before we go.
Watch an Amazon stream or too niche, not enough info. We could do it.
Not too niche. We could do that.
We could absolutely do that.
There's quite a lot in Amazon, surprisingly.
Yeah, we'll have to put that
far more than there is in Fishmen, for example.
Yeah, and far more than there was on Dragon Ogres, for example.
Way more than Dragon Ogres.
Ricky Chapman, we found on One Tech in that same Chaos Wolfram campaign. It was basically a two-way teleporter, very useful. We wore it on our wrist. Yep, there you go. Congrats on it.
I could teleport my wrist. Ow!
It would be very. That has to be like a stupid goofball character someone has used in Warhammer. A guy that sells magic artifacts and he gives a very literal description, but people like infer too much based on what he says.
Yeah, quite.
Yeah, this is a wrist teleporter. Oh, so I wear it on my wrist? Sure.
Sure. My wrist is now over there.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you all so much for joining us. As I said, this is my last stream before I leave for my trip, because I'm leaving tomorrow, which is crazy.
Yeah. Would you like to see what we're going to be discussing next Saturday when you're over here in the U of K?
I'll tell them what we'll
Sunday.
be
Sorry,
next Sunday.
Saturday, Sunday. What's the difference?
Yeah. So on Sunday, we took suggestions from y'all, which we really appreciate, and we decided on the most logical option, which is Albion. So we're going to be discussing the Miss Wreath island that was one of the best summer campaigns that Games Workshop managed to do for Warhammer Fantasy, which is super exciting. And it's going to be a good time. We'll be talking about the campaign itself, as well as, of course, the island, its history. We'll be talking about the race of giants, the Truthsayers, and the Druids. And we have a custom, a very special thumbnail just for this.
Oh, it's going to be super cool. Yay! Yeah, just made that not that long ago.
Yeah, it'll be fun because pretty much every single race in Warhammer is going to come up because literally everybody showed up for that party. And there's a lot of fun things to discuss with it, especially because it has a very unique relationship with Warhammer in that it has entered a very weird pseudo form of it is both genuinely canon and not canon simultaneously, which is very interesting.
It's also gone through multiple iterations as well, so it's going to be quite fun to have a quick discussion as well about what Albion used to be and how even the shape of it has significantly changed over time. Much like Ulthuan, which actually started off as a whole bunch of separate islands and then became one island when they moved into the 4th edition. Albion used to be very much a fantasy UK, and then it got turned into something very different over time, and then we eventually reached the 6th edition of Warhammer and the campaign where it was completely rewritten.
I'll get to such a fun on it. Wait, wrong version.
Yeah, too fast.
Yeah, Grimgalto, I'm Luther Harkin. By the way, Warhammer Beard, man, you're much uglier than I remember, Mr. Harkin. Yeah,
it's that Kermit rough.
Beard ranking stream that would take so long. You know how many beards, like
so many beards,
crazy bearded characters there are in fantasy? It's like just dwarfs alone or the Empire would take us so long. But anyway, that's it. We're done. Thank you very much, Avani. What is the Amazon's unit champion called? Amazon Prime. Get out. Thank you for the 3 months of Amazon Prime on Twitch.
Marvelous. Thank you. And I'll also say, make sure that if you want to see good old Loremaster of Sotek role playing, you can watch him role-playing with the LAWhammer crew this Friday at 7 p.m. UK time because he is joining us live.
Yeah, it's going to be super. And I'll be putting out announcements with links for that, and I'll also do a scheduled post. So on Friday, there will be a post that will go out that'll be like, hey, make sure you come watch the stream to remind you all. And we would love to have you all come by, not only support LAWhammer, but get to see that experience, which is going to be crazy cool.
It's going to be super fun. So other than that, we will see you all next Friday, hopefully, and if not then, on the Sunday.
Yep. And just to be clear, the stream on Friday is only on Twitch. It's on the LAWhammer Twitch only. It's not on YouTube.
And it'll go up on YouTube on the Monday following.
Yep. All right.
Yeah.
See you guys in Scotland.
Bye-bye. See you then. Bye-bye.